This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Still really only one story in town, although developments, of course, continue apace. Rioters now being warned that they could face terrorism charges and also that they can expect rapid sentencing, something that a character called Dylan Carey already knows about. He pleaded guilty yesterday at Liverpool Crown Court to violent disorder. At Liverpool Magistrates Court heard that a hostile crowd of around 200 people had formed in the area and began throwing items towards the mosque. They also chanted, "Who the bleep is Allah?" and shouted at police officers, "Why are you protecting them?" So, I mean, that immediately throws up a couple of questions, doesn't it, for people caught up in that kind of violence. Where did they get the idea that the killer of the 3 little girls in Southport was a Muslim? Why would they otherwise bring Allah into it? And where on earth did they get the incredibly toxic and dangerous notion that the police were somehow complicit in keeping information from the public?
Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question.
Well, that's one question answered. That is precisely where they got the idea that the police were keeping information from them. Call it a coincidence if you prefer. But guess which political party Dylan Carey was out canvassing for last month in Makerfield, up in the northwest? Go on, have a guess. I'm not going to give any prizes for this one. Yeah, you got it. At Nigel's latest publicity vehicle, the Reform UK Limited Party, a party which, of course, 20% of its current MPs have served time in jail for attacking British women. But, of course, the riots have absolutely nothing to do with the man that told people like Dylan Carey that the police officers were possibly, or the police were possibly keeping information from them, and indeed that the killer was a Muslim. Nothing to do with Nigel.
At no point in the last week, or in the previous 30 years, have I ever encouraged the use of violence. Have I ever encouraged the use of anti-democratic means. And yet, and, you know, you get the internet and people saying things on the internet. We have senior Labour politicians like Annie MacDonald saying, I wanted the riots to happen. Mm-hmm. We have former Conservative MPs like Anna Soubry saying that I orchestrated the riots. Mm-hmm. We have LBC presenters like James O'Brien calling them the Farage riots. I have had nothing to do with any form of street violence now or at any point in my career.
Did I call them the Farage riots? I'm so sorry. I should have said Farage. The Farage riots. I apologise to everybody concerned for that little slip of the tongue. What did he say about violence? I didn't quite catch it.
If they don't deliver this Brexit that I spent 25 years of my life working for, then I will be forced to don khaki, pick up a rifle and head for the front lines.
Gosh. And of course, one is left with the other question of where the idea to target these hotels came from. Why the idea to target hotels containing completely innocent human beings, children included, of course, some of whom witnessed rioters drawing their fingers across their throat in a throat-cutting gesture while they were cowering in buildings that were already on fire. Where on earth would the people currently being convicted of rioting got the idea that targeting these hotels would be a good plan?
We've no idea who some of these people are. We've no idea whether some of these might be ISIS.
That was Farage himself, filming himself in 2020 at a hotel where asylum seekers were being accommodated. I mean, you know, it's a wonderful rhetorical tactic, isn't it? I have no idea whether that man over there might be a paedophile. I'm just asking questions. I've no idea whether that woman over there might be a terrorist. I'm just asking questions. But the kind of people setting fire to bins and hotels and attacking police officers receive a very different message, don't they, from that kind of rhetoric. Well, at least I kind of think they do. So he's very unhappy about these riots being called the Farage riots. The explanation of why he posted that original clip suggesting that the authorities were keeping information from the police, and indeed that the police were keeping information from the people, and indeed that the culprit had been on intelligence watch lists, or indeed had been a Muslim. That was extraordinary. I should probably play you that bit as well. Who do you think his source was? Where would you turn to for your information? Where would you turn to for your reliable information on what was going on in Britain? Would you turn to me for the facts? Would you turn to the BBC? Perhaps GBB's is your preferred broadcast outlet, but you'd probably want to double check or triple check, wouldn't you, the provenance of these claims. So you've seen on social media, or you've come across the claim somewhere that the police are deliberately keeping information from, and that is the single greatest reason why police officers, some of whom will be listening to this program, some of whom their wives, their husbands, their partners, their children will be listening to this program. Police officers coming under sustained and vicious attack from members of the public who believe the lie that the police were somehow complicit in keeping information from the public, a lie that you just heard issued from Nigel Farage's own nicotine-stained lips, albeit with the constant caveat, I don't know, I'm just asking questions. I don't know whether he's feigning ignorance of British law or whether he is genuinely ignorant of British law, but the police can't decide to release any names at all, especially when they're under 18. That decision has to be taken by a High Court judge. But why let the facts stand in the way of an opportunity to inflame the sort of violent thugs that have been terrorising completely innocent and law-abiding citizens up and down our country for the last week? Why let the facts stand in the way of the feelings? But where do you think he was getting his information from? This sitting member of Parliament, this elected MP, where do you think this broadcaster, this self-styled journalist, where do you think he was getting his information from? Where do you think he turns to when he wants to get a really clear steer on what's actually going on in Britain? It wouldn't be an alleged human trafficker and organised criminal based in Romania, surely. It just wouldn't be, would it? There's no earthly way anybody would claim that they only put this poison into public discourse because they believed what they read on the social media feed of a Romania-based alleged human trafficker and organised criminal. Not even Nigel Farage would stoop that low, surely, to try to exonerate his own culpability in this crisis by claiming that he had acted in an entirely honourable fashion by taking the words of an alleged human trafficker and organised criminal as potential gospel.
This is the problem, isn't it? One of the reasons the Southport riots were as bad as they were is we weren't told the truth. There were stories online from some very prominent folks with big followings, Andrew Tate, etc.
Whoa, what? Andrew Tate? Literally the alleged human trafficker and organised criminal. So here we have a British MP claiming that his decision to inject poison into the bloodstream of the British public, encouraging people like the young man in Liverpool who has just pleaded guilty to violent disorder, but who in April, of course, was canvassing for Nigel Farage's political party, encouraging them to join public violence where the police are being accused of keeping information from the public. Nigel Farage's source for this was Andrew Tate's social media account? But he's absolutely adamant that the riots had nothing to do with him.
At no point in the last week, or in the previous 30 years, have I ever encouraged the use of violence, have I ever encouraged the use of anti-democratic means. And yet, you get the internet, and people saying things on the internet. We have senior Labour politicians, like Annie MacDonald, saying, I wanted the riots to happen. Mm-hmm. We have former Conservative MPs like Anna Soubry saying that I orchestrated the riots. Mm-hmm. We have LBC presenters like James O'Brien calling them the Farage riots. I have had nothing to do with any form of street violence now or at any point in my career.
And yet all of the people engaging in the street violence believed what Nigel Farage told them might be true just 1 week ago. So, hey, I am a little bit guilty sometimes of cognitive bias. Is it fair to call these pogroms, these riots, after the man, the most prominent disseminator of the lies which many of the rioters apparently believed? Is it fair to call them the Farage or Farage riots? 0345 6060 973. If not, why not? I think there's a fairly good case there of why it's a perfectly reasonable sobriquet, but Nigel's very upset, recording more little films of himself, casting himself as the real victim. 3 dead girls, of course, in Southport. Police under constant attack from a mindless thuggery. You've got hotels being set on fire. You've got shops being looted. You've got businesses being destroyed. But I think we should all take a moment now to feel sorriest for Nigel Farage, the real victim of the 2024 riots up and down this country, is clearly the man who told the rioters that the police were keeping information from them. And where did he get his information from? An alleged human trafficker and organised criminal. But hey-ho, he doesn't like the title Farage Riots. Simple question. Is it fair? And invitation is always open for him to return to this studio, have a chat with me. Tom Swarbrick did an excellent job yesterday of holding him to account for words that he has actually said. Didn't brook any of Farage's usual attempts to shift the focus or to gilly-gash over the information, or to start talking about something completely different, or to answer a question that hadn't been asked. But the Farage riots, is that fair? It's 10:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 10 is the time. A few of you suggesting that the Robinson riots trips off the tongue a little more felicitously, but that, of course, isn't his real name. So I don't know if it works quite as effectively as the Farage riots. What do you think? Because he doesn't think it's fair at all. Bless him. Nushra's in Halesowen. Nushra, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm sure I'm going to trip over my words and make a complete mess of this. I just feel very impassioned, and I'm so glad that you're picking up on his interview yesterday. So one of the things that strikes me, I mean, we know that Nigel Farage has a long, track record of making inflammatory comments and doing what he's doing, but it's worse now because he's a sitting MP, isn't he, in Parliament? So he has different responsibilities since the general election, and I would have thought that every member that sits in Parliament is there to uphold law and order in our society.
Well, they're certainly there to ask questions of, for example, the Home Secretary at a time of national crisis, which he could have done as an MP, but he didn't turn up to that.
No, he didn't. But I think that when the police are having to investigate the murder of these 3 girls, and, when we have the person who was at that point under 18 and the laws around anonymity, but to immediately start to make suggestions and influences. When,
well, I mean, to be fair, he did get the information from the Twitter account of an alleged human trafficker and organised criminal. So we shouldn't rush to judgment, Nushra. No,
we shouldn't, because that's what all MPs should do, isn't it?
There's one thing that a politician does in a situation like this, whether it is the murder of David Amos or Joe Cox or 3 little girls in Southport. They say, until the facts are known, we should all resist the temptation to jump to conclusions. Until all the facts are known, we should resist the temptation to jump to conclusions. And they are a flawed institution. They are imperfect, but any semblance of patriotism demands that you put your faith in institutions like the Crown Prosecution Service, like the police services of this country, and like the government. Whatever you may think of the party that's in charge, you have to be able to trust the Home Secretary. So any serving politician, just as any responsible journalist, would have to say, until the facts are known, please avoid jumping to conclusions. But of course, Farage did this.
Yeah,
was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question.
10:21 is the time. So is Farage riots a fair name for these events, Nusra?
He's an instigator. He's not the only one. But he, what's the man with the name, 10 names, Tommy,
yes.
Whatever, he's not a sitting MP in Parliament. So there are lots of people.
That's what makes the case different. That's what makes the accusation different.
That's it for me. And also, as you said, he's the leader of Reform Party, PLC, whatever it is.
Yes.
So he has different set of responsibilities.
You'd hope so, naively, I think, in our case, or in this case. But you would at least hope so. But of course, he remains a big cheerleader for Donald Trump, who, of course, responded in a very similar way to the January the 6th riots, where people headed for the Capitol in Washington, baying for the blood of Trump's own Vice President, Mike Pence, as a consequence of Trump's incitements, but Trump continues to claim it had nothing to do with him. There's another parallel there, although perhaps worth pointing out that last time he went to America to cheerlead for Donald Trump, I don't think he actually got to meet him, which must have been very hard for him to handle. Nusra, thank you. Emily's in Oxford. Emily, what do you think?
Hi, I think that it's definitely a Farage riot, but it's a mixture of things, because also the climate that Labour have inherited with the overcrowding of the prisons sort of gives people not free will, but people can do things with limited consequence, and they can feel that, and there's just something so unsettling in the air that it's hard to control. So it's the rhetoric that Farage has used, and some of these people may be surprised. I think there have been 400 arrests made.
Yes.
And where is that going to come?
It's not over yet.
By themselves, exactly. And I'm also, there's a protest on my road, there's an asylum office in Oxford. My family, I've been brought up, I'm white, but I'm actually mixed Asian. Right. My family are Pakistani. They've grown up in this fear, and it's crazy having me compared to my cousins. I remember walking around with my older cousin, and people will look at him and ask me if I'm okay. And is it a sort of welfare check? And I just think it's scary.
Yeah, and that is something that I think your own ethnicity is going to amplify. What I mean by that, it's going to be more pertinent, according to people who fear or feel that they might be targeted by the kind of thugs that we have seen spouting the nonsense that Nigel Farage spoon-fed to them last Tuesday. The time is 24 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I always bring a little bit of light, even into the darkest conversations. So well done for reminding me of what we used to call the shaggy defence. Whatever the evidence may point to, however clear it may be, Shaggy sang about it, didn't he? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Nigel Farage yesterday using this studio to essentially perform a Shaggy tribute act. Amelia is in Sheffield. Amelia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First-time caller, a bit nervous.
You're very welcome. Sorry. Don't be. It's only me.
So I think some of the things, I know you're talking about Nigel Farage today, but I feel like other politicians have some brunt to bear in this. Nigel Farage is obviously the most obvious, white presenting, been more, overt in what he's been wanting to say about immigrants and migrants and everything like that. But I'd like to know where Suella Braverman is all in this. Where is Priti Patel in this? The ones who have stoked these flames over the last few years. And
you make a very good point, particularly with the heads up Emily just gave us. There are a lot of reports around a far-right Telegram account posting addresses and details of law firms that deal with immigration issues. And of course, that phrase, lefty lawyers, that idea, the seed that lawyers practicing law somehow are culpable or enemies or people to be derided and feared and possibly attacked, that tracks back to politicians like the ones you've described using phrases like lefty lawyers. I think Johnson might have used it as well.
Yeah, I find it a bit incredibly insulting that I voted for Keir, but I find it really insulting that Keir hasn't called out, like the Labour MP, Zara Sultana, has called them out as Islamophobic and racist.
Yes.
But Keir and the media, a certain specific subsets of the media, are calling them out as far right, or the word activist, which I feel is so insulting to the actual genuine activists who have come before.
Yeah, I guess you have to draw a distinction between, and it sounds odd, but it's moot. You have to draw a distinction between the people throwing petrol bombs, the people attacking the police officers, and the people just attending and shouting abuse. There are differences there. So, or even the people attending because they've got they've got a problem with the idea of immigration and they're horrified by what is going on around them. It's an unlikely scenario that they'd hang around for very long, but there have to be differences between terrorists, between arsonists, between people attacking the police and people who aren't. So, you come to a word there.
Yeah.
And also the rejection of the idea that it's Islamophobic is among the stupidest things I've ever heard. I thought Zara Sultana was appallingly treated on Good Morning Britain the other day on a programme where Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, was interviewed by her own husband. That is absolutely surreal. Some sort of editorial holiday must have been taken in the offices at that normally rather brilliant television programme on that particular morning. They're attacking mosques, but it's not Islamophobic. How the hell do you work that one out? I do not know. So although the blame must be spread, and although the seeds of this violence were sown many, many years ago, I'm looking at the story, the Bar Council, the chair of the Bar Council, complaining about Conservatives crossing a line with when they put together a dossier that led to threats against an immigration solicitor. Tory attacks on lefty lawyers could fuel abuse, and now we've got far-right Telegram accounts listing the addresses of law firms and encouraging people to turn up and set fire to them, giving them advice on how to construct homemade weapons. So yes, absolutely it goes back to people who deployed that sort of language. But what do we think about the title Farage riots? We're only allowed one title.
I feel it's very easy to paint Farage as if he's he's more of a symptom of what's wrong rather than the cause of it, because I feel like, almost over a decade of, the hostile environment,
But he's been in the middle of it since the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with you. So let's think about the lad in Liverpool who has gone to jail, the one who was part of a protest where they were shouting, "Who the bleep is Allah?" and screaming at the police, "Why are you protecting them?" This man was out canvassing for Nigel Farage's party in April. Where do you think he got the idea that the police were keeping information from the public, or indeed that the killer was a Muslim?
Oh, definitely. It's not just Nigel Farage who's been peddling all this, and I'm not saying that we don't, account in for some of that. I feel like we account in for the majority of, I feel I saw parts of Tom Solbrick's interview yesterday with him, and as much as Nigel wants to shuffle off to the side and go, "Oh, it wasn't me, I'm just asking the important questions," and then Tom started to push back and be like, "But that's not up to us." Do you know what I mean? I think part of the media has to take responsibility and just be that they have given this man a platform. He's been on Question Time however many times. You know what I mean?
4 million times.
Yeah, he's been on Question Time however many times.
4 million. Anytime. It's 4 million times.
I think so. And then he, whenever there's the need of balance on the BBC or, anything that is under editorial whatever that means, it's the need of going, okay, well, these are concerns of minority communities, but also here's some white guys' concerns. Do you know what I mean? Because we can't leave them out. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, of course I do. No, of course I do. And listen, platforms are fine as long as they're used properly. And LBC gave them a platform yesterday, but Tom Swarbrick conducted the interview in a way that if all journalists had managed to, then he wouldn't have achieved anything like the hold upon people like these rioters that he has been permitted to develop over the last 10, 15 years. It's 10:30. Thank you, Amelia. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Nigel Farage very unhappy about the riots undertaken by people who believed him when he talked about the possibility of the police keeping information from the public or the killer of those 3 little girls in Southport being a Muslim. They're very unhappy that the riots being undertaken by people who believed him are being called the Farage riots. So I think it's only fair to ask, is that fair? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33, so the only real quibble with whether or not these riots should be named after Nigel Farage is that it possibly lets other people off the hook. And that phrase, lefty lawyers, you heard in the news there that far-right terrorists are planning to attack law firms that deal with immigration law today. That phrase, lefty lawyers, warnings from the head of the Bar Council years ago that this could fuel abuse. I'd say more predictions even than warnings. People writing inevitably in the Daily Telegraph, someone called Tom Harris writing under the headline, "Politicians are right to attack lefty lawyers." So is it fair to call them the Farage riots when somebody who I think used to be a Labour MP can write a column for the Daily Telegraph under the headline, "Politicians are right to attack lefty lawyers"? Now, obviously, he doesn't mean physically, but what is the likelihood of somebody reading something like that and thinking that attacking lefty lawyers is absolutely acceptable behaviour? I don't know. Letting other people off the hook. Rishi Sunak deployed the phrase lefty lawyers. I think that 30p Lee, always hard to remember what party he was in at the time, but 30p Lee, who was spreading lies about asylum seekers being housed in hotels in his own constituency last week, only to be told by one of the people in the hotel that they were actually nurses, international nurses, working within the NHS, he has denounced lefty lawyers. So if there are attacks on law firms today, how much responsibility lies with anybody, journalists included, who have attacked lawyers for offering one of the most fundamental bases of the unwritten British Constitution, legal representation? It's incredible. For Farage riots, what about the Dacre riots when he was calling High Court judges enemies of the people? The idea that lawyers are ripe for attack by people who perhaps are not quite as well educated. They're certainly just as intelligent, but they might not be as well educated as people like Paul Dacre or Nigel Farage or Tom Harris. I nearly said all 30p Lee, but I think that might be stretching the point a little bit. But what message do they take from prominent public figures saying it's okay to attack lefty lawyers? I don't know. But for now, it's the Farage riots, I think. Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what do you think?
I think that Nigel Farage is very clever in the way he's calm, the way he speaks, and he can fool ordinary people. He has this way about him that, I'm a Muslim, I can see through what he's saying, but ordinary people can believe him. He's very sort of measured, and the way he speaks, maybe the right accent, the way that he's a pub man, drinking his pint in the pub, and, he's one of them. Well, that's what he likes to say.
Yes, there are reports, and I have to stress it, not from Andrew Tate, who I don't consider to be a reliable news source in the way that Nigel Farage does, but there are reports that when the cameras aren't around, he puts the pint back on the bar and picks up his glass of red wine, but I couldn't possibly comment on that.
No, but yes, but, being a Muslim, British born here, and seeing all this hate is very hard, but Nigel Farage, he stokes it, but he stokes it in a way, it's like someone sort of saying, let's.
Some people do. It does happen occasionally, but the problem, it's the same thing that happened with Trump on obviously a much bigger and more dangerous scale. The problem is that journalists have a vocabulary that is respectful and respectable in some ways. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always apply. But that's why they've had to set up their own television stations, because they want to practice a form of journalism that's completely detached from the truth and from reality. But traditional journalists don't usually know how to handle blatant liars. But of course, he doesn't always stay calm.
Do you worry that based on what you've said in the last few days, you might get a knock on the door from the police?
No.
You don't think that's going to come your way?
What, for asking the truth about the perpetrator of a heinous crime?
For suggesting that the police are lying without any evidence.
I didn't say they lied. You've done that. That's the third time you've done that, and you are irresponsible and wrong to do so. You are irresponsible and wrong to do so.
I can give you the quote again, Nigel, that you said the truth about Southport was being withheld from us.
I didn't call them that. I didn't say they were lying.
So they're deliberately not giving people the truth.
That's a very different thing to lying. So don't use that word again, please. You've done it 3 times and you're wrong.
Lying. Let's listen to that again. I want you to notice the shift there when Tom presents him with evidence that he's lying.
Do you worry that based on what you've said in the last few days, you might get a knock on the door from the police?
No.
You don't think that's going to come your way?
What, for asking the truth about the perpetrator of a heinous crime?
For suggesting that the police are lying without any evidence.
I didn't say they lied. You've done that. That's the third time you've done that, and you are irresponsible and wrong to do so. You are irresponsible and wrong to do so.
I can give you the quote again, Nigel, that you said the truth about Southport was being withheld from us.
I didn't call them that. I didn't say they were lying.
So they're deliberately not giving people the truth.
That's a very different thing to lying. So don't use that word again, please. You've done it 3 times and you're wrong.
It's always amazing when the narcissist appears through the very, very, very carefully cultivated layers of sort of fagash bonhomie, bogus beery bonhomie, and then that very, very angry, shamed little boy just pops to the surface. But you saw it there, trying to tell Tom Swarbrick what words he can and cannot use, trying to tell me what words I can and cannot use when I choose to refer to them as the Farage riots. Or, of course, if I was as disingenuous as him, I'd just say, I'm only asking questions. Andrew Tate told me we should call them the Farage riots, and I personally consider that alleged human trafficker and organised criminal to be an entirely reliable source for information. So, hey, I'm just asking questions. So he does lose his rag sometimes, Naz.
Yes, yes, he does. I didn't listen to that. I listen to your show every day, but I didn't listen to that bit.
It's all right. It's not compulsory. There is a clip, of course, a very long interview I did with him many years ago, which you can find on YouTube, where he lost his temper even more, perhaps, than he did there. Certainly, when his director of communications came into the studio to drag him out. There were frayed tempers galore. Naz, thank you. Chris is in Belfast. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, bud. First things first, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Good man, thank you.
First thing I'd like to say to you is thank you for ruining my holiday. I read your book while I was in Mexico, and it just made me angry.
Even now, even after the last election.
Yeah, well, yeah, I read your book. I got it in the airport, and I thought, I'll read that while
I'm sorry,
myself.
mate. I didn't ruin your holiday. I know that's a figure of speech, but some people have told me that reading it now, knowing that all of the people in it essentially have got a form of comeuppance at the ballot box, reading it now is a more uplifting experience than it was when, for example, I wrote it, but clearly not for you.
No.
Carry on.
I completely agree with you in calling them the Farage riots, and I also think he needs to be held to account in some way, shape or form. I'm a teacher, and I spend quite a lot of my time sort of scrolling through social media, but I have to be very, very, very careful in regards to what I post, what I say.
Yes, that's a very good point. That's a very good point.
I can't be seen to be sort of political in any way, shape or form, even though I am at home. I can't post anything at all that might be seen to bring the profession into disrepute. So I don't know how I know he sort of skirts the line and sort of does a very Tucker Carlson-esque type, because, but what about this?
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's disingenuous and deeply dangerous. But if you are a broadcaster or a journalist, an opinion purveyor like I am, then there's a defence that doesn't apply when you're a serving member of parliament. When a terrible crime happens, the only job politicians have is to urge the population to stay calm until the facts are known. And obviously to stay calm after the facts are known as well, but putting bogus facts or bogus suggestions, deliberately provocative, obviously insightful, into the public sphere is absolutely disgusting. The problem with Farage is that he's been so disgusting for so long. You suffer a bit from that Trumpish condition of flooding the zone with disgustingness. But this, even by his standards, was a moment of particular disgrace.
Yeah. And we have. I don't want to call him Nigel Farage light, because he's. We have a guy called Jamie Bryson. Here, you may have heard of him.
Yes.
I wouldn't encourage you to go and look at his Twitter feed. I've been doing that the last couple of days, and it's quite frankly made me sick. But the
tactics, the tactics of provocation, the tactics of riling people up. I'm not as familiar with the character you describe as I am with Farage, but I don't think anybody honest can be in any doubt at all about what the intention is, what thoughts he's trying to foment in the minds of people when he says things like the things he said last Tuesday. Darren Lewis has been in touch, rather brilliant sports journalist on the Mirror, and he reminds me that these lists I've referred to are being circulated and havoc is being wreaked with the deliberate intention of intimidating and forcing families and people of colour to change their lives. But, writes Darren, we will get through it. We've lived it. Our parents even more so we know. Just as we could see a mile away the racist rhetoric and what it would lead to. So we can rely on our experience, on our parents' fortitude and the support of our allies across the country, standing up to be counted and to defy it again. So credit to all of the leaders urging people not to fall into the trap of criminality and giving those intent on creating chaos what they want. It might suit politicians and certain elements to continue turning people against each other, but many see it for what it is. It won't succeed. Which brings us back to the events in Birmingham 2 days ago, where a group of Muslim men were preparing to defend themselves from reported attacks that were coming in imminently, and then disgraced themselves by instead taking the attack to a local pub. Elders from the Muslim community in that part of Birmingham visited the pub yesterday to apologise on behalf of their young men. But the Daily Telegraph dedicates 2 pages to that incident, where I think one person got hit, possibly more. 2 pages dedicated to that, when we have hotels on fire, shops being looted, police being attacked, police being injured, police being hospitalised. I mean, that idea, the desperation that some people on the right have to try to turn this into a Charlottesville-style both sides. Desperation now for people who know in their hearts that they've fomented the far-right violence we're seeing up and down the country. They've got 2 choices. They either admit it, they either cop to it, they either put their hands up and say, sorry, I just wanted to get elected, I just wanted to get a TV show, I just wanted to get famous, I didn't want people to be setting fire to police vans and hotels containing asylum seekers, I just did it for attention, I did it for money and clout, or I did it to sell papers, or alternative 2, is they try and double down by pretending that there are both sides to this, and that there are good people on both sides, and it's a both sides problem. And look, there's one Muslim carrying one weapon. That means that they're exactly the same as the thousands of people over there rioting up and down the country on streets inhabited by entirely blameless families. 10:46 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to examine the culpability, the responsibility of Nigel Farage for events up and down the country that many people have taken to calling the Farage riots, something about which he is profoundly unhappy and characteristically determined to make himself the victim. But is it fair? Possibly it isn't fair. The suggestion that it's not fair because lots of other people are to blame as well is the closest we've come so far to complete exoneration. But maybe you are in a position to argue that people like the young man who was canvassing for Reform UK in April and is now facing jail for participating in violent unrest, it's not somehow a follower of Nigel Farage's rhetoric. Good luck if you fancy that, but you are more than welcome. It is 10:49. Adrian is in Hull. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. I mean, for me, I think it's going to go down in history and be called the Farage riots.
Like the Gordon riots against the Catholics, I think, in the 18th century, was it?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it just seems to me like it's history repeating itself. You know, it's one figurehead. I don't know what this chap has against Muslims, but if we go back to a certain political party in Western Europe in the 1930s, the leader of that party had an issue against a certain religion as well, and you know, saying things can be obviously very dangerous.
And he's been doing that forever, hasn't he? Talking about fifth columns and enemies within, and people coming over, people staying in hotels might be members of ISIS. You know, they might all be, I don't know, Mickey Rooney impersonators. That's just as valid a contribution to public discourse. But he knows exactly what buttons he's pressing when he turns up in Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars or at asylum hotels with his camcorder. But no, it's not a direct involvement, is it, though? As it were.
No. Obviously, he's not there, sort of throwing bricks and sort of stirring up the crowds, etc. But you don't need to be, because these people who are effectively cowards who sit behind a desk and spout all this, and then they get their foot soldiers to go out and do what they're too afraid to do.
So are we confident then that of all the public figures, whether it's Tommy Ten Names or the Hopkins woman, or whether it's supposedly respectable politicians like Priti Patel or Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson, using phrases like lefty lawyers or turning stop the boats into a mantra, the mind of a man who elected to attack police and accuse them of keeping information from them about the killer of 3 little children, the mind of that man has been more curdled by Nigel Farage than anybody else in the game.
I'd say so. I'm lucky to be a privileged white male, and I just find all this highly irresponsible. And for him to use that word irresponsible to others for saying things, I just think when he's in a position of power that he is now,
it's not tricky, is it? Just let's all wait. I know feelings are running high, but let's all wait until the facts are known. And then the thing we haven't talked about, I might ask you about this actually, because you sound like a clever guy. The thing, there's an elephant in the room since Monday, and I've caught myself being part of the problem here, because we talk about the fact that the man turned out not to be any of the things that people like Nigel Farage and Andrew Tate and Tommy Ten Names were suggesting very deliberately to their followers that he might be. But that has an implicit subtext that if he had been an asylum seeker, then the riots would somehow be okay. I think we've all lost sight of that problem a bit.
Well,
you see what I mean?
Yeah. Obviously,
what if it had been true? Would we now be sitting here saying, "Well, there you go, then"? So it was we're perfectly entitled to attack the police. I mean, that's kind of scary. That element of the rhetoric troubles me.
I mean, that's just to give themselves some justification as to what they were doing. Obviously, this has been going on for years, and they wanted some kind of movement, and this excuse has now happened. I'm obviously in Hull for what happened Saturday. It was quite bad, and there's been reports that there's going to be more issues this evening, so we've been encouraged to stay out of the city centre again. So unfortunately, there's going to be more.
Be interesting, won't it, to see? I mean, they're certainly agitating and recruiting and encouraging and exhorting, but I wonder whether the sight of their fellow travellers being sent to jail, being sent down facing terrorism charges, I wonder if it will have a calming effect on some of these people. Vicky writes, Farage started all this. Whatever party he was head of, he always aimed his ire at immigrants. There was the British National Party, there was the National Front. He certainly knocked about with prominent members of both in the earlier days of his career, but the idea that he started it, maybe he started the move into the mainstream of this kind of bile, this kind of toxicity. And of course, what we're seeing on the streets is echoes of what it used to look like. But he somehow cloaked it in a patina of middle class beery bonhomie. 10:53 is the time. Thank you, Adrian. Anna's in Camden. Anna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. I just wanted to say that I think the Farage riots is a bit of an oversimplification. Like, he definitely plays a large role, but to me, this is like a symptom of a kind of erosion of qualities and standards in Parliament from parliamentarians from the Tory party, the acceptance of like populist far-right rhetoric in all the parties. And like, just remember, I think the MP for Tamworth a short time before was saying in Parliament that the local people want their Holiday Inn back. So I feel like
yes, we played that clip on Monday. But you don't think? I mean, I may be exaggerating his role, but I don't think any of that would have happened without Farage, without him getting so much attention, so much newspaper coverage, radio shows, TV shows, constantly banging on about how awful immigrants are, how dreadful Muslims are, how the hotels could be full of ISIS people, and for reasons I don't fully understand, the Tory party tacked towards that toxicity, and then, as you remind us, so did elements of the Labour movement as well.
Yeah, I don't think you're over exaggerating it at all. But the problem is the reason why people like me feel unsafe right now. My dad literally called me and begged me not to leave the house.
Right.
My best friend doesn't want to go to work, who's a doctor, because he's scared that he's going to get attacked.
Yeah.
But obviously he has to go. But it's just like, the problem is the acceptance and the failure to stand firm, and like stuff like BBC always trying to do both sides of an argument. There is right and there is wrong. It's either that people in this country like me, we are actual citizens, there's only one tier of citizenship, or there's not. And it's like, even in the Labour Party, how they treated black MPs, how they failed to protect black MPs, that sends out a dog whistle that actually, if you're going to give us our votes, we're going to kind of tap dance for you, and we're going to erode the quality. So everybody has a role to play in this. Doors opening.
Who's that? What's that in the background?
I'm in the lift.
You're in a what?
It was more quiet.
Oh, you're in a lift. The door's opening, He said, didn't it? Well, that was timing, wasn't it? I don't dispute anything that you said, Anna. And I agree. I don't know if I'd say it was an oversimplification, because you've got to call them something. But it's certainly a simplification. All titles are simplifications. The Gordon riots, just giving myself a little Wikipedia history lesson, began as a large and orderly protest against some parliamentary legislation which was supposed to reduce official discrimination against Catholics. But a bloke called Gordon, head of the Protestant Association, argued that Catholics would be able to join the British Army and plot treason. So there you go, an early parallel with Farage talking about fifth columnists and the enemy within. Lord George Gordon did exactly the same thing with Catholics, and guess what happened in 1780? Several days of rioting in London motivated by anti-Catholic hatred. Well, it would be Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred. So I don't know whether you derive any comfort from the fact that there's nothing new under the sun. I spoke to Ian Hislop, of all people, about this once, and at the time I didn't understand what he said. I was younger and a bit more emotional. And I said, how do you stay so cool? I mean, how do you publish a magazine every fortnight that's hilarious when you are also covering events that are absolutely awful? I think Trump was on the march at the time, so just before he became president. And Ian said to me that he takes some comfort from his studies of classical history, because everything that happens has happened before. So the riots that we're seeing now in Hull and Rotherham and Tamworth and everywhere else are essentially rioting motivated by anti-Muslim sentiment or anti-immigrant sentiment. Go back to 1780, we had exactly the same. Rioting, looting, attacks on the prison, attacks on the Bank of England, arguably the most destructive riots in the history of London, burning of Catholic chapels in foreign embassies. Magistrates didn't invoke the Riot Act because they were frightened of the mob. No repression at all until the government finally sent in the army. I'm almost word for word that. And yet it is 250 years ago. I shouldn't do sums like that in my head so quickly because I almost always get them wrong. But isn't that, I mean, you see what I mean? Not necessarily comforting, but we sometimes think that we are living on the brink or we are in the midst of something new and unprecedented. But it has all happened before. 10:58 is the time. Thank you, Anna. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You're right, Nick in Fareham says it's Barnaby Rudge has a little look at the Gordon riots, the Charles Dickens novel. And it's always nice when you text me to tell me that you can't get through to the programme, Alex, but there's literally nothing I can do about it. It's a consequence of all the people that are ringing in and getting their calls picked up. I think we'll continue with elements of this. People like Anna being told by their dads not to go out today. A friend, a doctor, not wanting to go to work. I don't want to sound trite, but you sit on the tube, I think I mentioned this to you, and you see the young woman in the headscarf, or you see the sort of children of an age where they will know what's been going on, and they will know that their ethnicity would make them targets for some of the people dancing to Farage's tune. And you wonder what's changing below the surface. What's reversing, Darren making those points about his parents' generation having put up with much worse. and having come through it. But this flowering of hatred, it does feel, for our generation, for this era, it does have elements of novelty to it. So we may also today have a look at how it's changing your life already.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. I won't tell you who it was, but it's someone you know, and it's someone you've heard on this programme. It is a prominent politician of the Muslim faith, not Sadiq Khan. I just say that because he has appeared on this programme, I think, more than any other prominent politicians of the Muslim faith. And they said to me about 6 months ago, no more actually, about late last year, they said to me that they were contemplating a kind of escape route. That the way that the Tory party, and I think I can tell you that it was a Tory politician, the Tory party were embracing the kind of rhetoric that Nigel Farage had made palatable for the middle classes via the pages of the Daily Telegraph or the various broadcasters that have given him prominence over the years. And this very sensible, very straight-talking Tory politician, Muslim Tory politician, I guess I've narrowed it down too much now. It'd be quite easy to work out who it was, but I'm not breaching any confidences because I've heard them say this publicly, were making plans to emigrate, making plans to possibly go and live somewhere else because of the direction of traffic. And what I didn't tell them at the time, which is why I'm not telling you who it was I thought that they were probably overreacting. And I thought, as a white person, I can't say that because what do I know? But I don't think things are that bad, are they? And then fast forward, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. Fast forward 7 or 8 months, and they're trying to burn down mosques. They're setting fire to hotels full of people that they presume are of the Muslim faith. And then they're attacking the police because people like Nigel Farage have told them that the police are probably keeping information from them about the real identity of a killer that British law literally prevents the authorities from naming until a High Court judge or until a senior judge has been able to make that decision. Isn't that extraordinary? Yes, you've all guessed who the politician was, but just don't tell them that I thought that they might, at the time of been overreacting, because I certainly don't think that now. I really don't. I get it. And when you hear people like Anna in Camden telling us that Dad doesn't want her to leave the house today, when you hear of businesses closing early, when you hear of people hiding in their own homes as a rampaging mob came up their street and they could see it on TikTok, you do realise that you can never take peace and security, you can never take harmony for granted. There are always elements in the background, below the surface, that relish moments like this, that dream of them, that dedicate their entire life to the hope that they will come back round again. The opportunity to be lawless, to be feral, to fully to take off your shirt and display your swastika tattoos. I turned into Arkwright then from Open All Hours. I don't know where tattoos. I said the opportunity to give vent to all the dark thoughts that you have as a consequence of civilization or political correctness or wokeness, whatever phrase you prefer to describe attempts to keep the poison in the background, to keep the poison out of the public space. You sit there dreaming of the day when you'll be able to come back to it. And there it is, that day came, didn't it? Last Tuesday, when Nigel Farage told his followers that the authorities might be keeping information from them and that the culprit might have been on an intelligence services watch list. And where was he getting his information from? He was getting his information from a man based in Romania who is facing trial for human trafficking and organised crime. I can't think of an example in recent British history of an MP, crucially, a member of Parliament, engaging in such blatant and disgraceful behaviour. Who on earth would say to themselves, oh, aye, there's a bloke who's on trial for human trafficking and organised crime, making claims which he can have absolutely no basis for. I think I'll amplify them on social media. Who would do that? You can see why grifters do it. Grifters who are almost certainly already asking their witless supporters to donate to the next legal fund while they live it up in five-star luxury. You can see why they do it. It's a business model. Farage has got a job. He's got a political party, albeit one in which 20% of its MPs have served time in British jails for attacks on a British woman. But he's got a political party. He's got a job. He's got a salary. Does he still have a TV show? He doesn't need to do this. It's not an income stream. Well, I suppose membership of Reform UK Limited is a form of income stream, but he's not like the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis or Tommy 10 Names. He doesn't need to generate these levels of hatred and to disseminate this level of lie in order to keep his bank account afloat, in order to afford his next holiday, does he? So why does he do it? And that, I think, is the next question. So we'll continue to query whether or not calling them the Farage riots is fair. 0345 6060 973. But I think the question that is absolutely attendant upon that inquiry is, why did he do this? Why? And you'll struggle to get through at the moment, so I'll rattle through a few calls and then we can start answering this question. Why did a sitting MP, an elected MP, why did he do this?
Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident. Just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question.
Until, of course, he's actually held accountable, until a journalist has the cojones to remind him of his own words, which is what Tom Swarbrick did last night on LBC on the subject of the police suppressing information or the police keeping information from you and from me.
Do you worry that based on what you've said in the last few days, you might get a knock on the door from the police?
No.
You don't think that's going to come your way?
What, for asking the truth about the perpetrator of a heinous crime?
For suggesting that the police are lying without any evidence?
I didn't say they lied. You've done that. That's the third time you've done that, and you are irresponsible and wrong to do so. You are irresponsible and wrong to do so.
I can give you the quote again, Nigel, that you said the truth about Southport was being withheld from us.
I didn't call them that. I didn't say they were lying.
So they're deliberately not giving people the truth?
That's a very different thing to lying. So don't use that word again, please. You've done it 3 times and you're wrong.
Interesting that he calls Tom Swarbrick irresponsible. Where are you getting your facts from again, Nigel?
This is the problem, isn't it? One of the reasons the Southport riots were as bad as they were is we weren't told the truth. There were stories online from some very prominent folks with big followings, Andrew Tate, etc.
So I'm getting my facts from a man facing trial for human trafficking and organised crime, but Tom Swarbrick is irresponsible for reading my own words back to me. I've spent years wondering how this clown has managed to capture so much attention and so many people. I still don't really get it, except the appeal of telling them that their bigotries, their prejudices, their hatred of foreigners is not only acceptable, but also to be encouraged. 12 minutes after 11. So why did he do it? And is it fair to call them the riots? Chris is in Nottingham. Chris, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I think we might be about to slightly disagree on something, but that's
nothing wrong with that.
It's very unusual.
I call you irresponsible, I think, when we reach that point.
Whereas I think
it's not, mate. It's a terrible phone line. I don't know. I don't want to be rude. I don't know whether you've got a handkerchief over the receiver,
sorry,
or you've got a cold. Go on, take me off speaker or whatever it is. That's better.
Right, is that better? So Farage is responsible for laying the groundwork. Definitely.
I'm going to have to come back, mate. The phone line. I don't know what's happened to it since you spoke to the producer, but we will come back. Noah is in Leeds. Noah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You all right?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm just calling because I feel like, in my opinion, the problem is the government we've just had in the last 14 years. And I feel like when you see...
We're letting them off the hook a bit with the Farage riots hashtag.
I think that when you look at a place like Rotherham and how much has the government spoke about a place like Rotherham in the last 14 years. They've just left places like that to rot.
Well, the Red Wall and levelling up and the Get Brexit Done, that was all designed entirely to appeal to former Labour constituencies across the north of England, wasn't it?
I feel like people there now, they probably have no prospects, no jobs, no opportunities, and they've been sucked in to right-wing ideology, sort of brainwashed and whipped up to believe that the immigrants coming in are the problem because of, politicians at the top using inflammatory rhetoric.
I don't even know if the class thing works. I mean, we don't know the identity of all the 400 people who have been arrested, but they're not all going to be dispossessed, isolated citizens. They're going to be middle class people there. Admittedly, if you've got a column in the Daily Telegraph, you don't need to go out and throw petrol bombs at the police. But the words that are fermenting in the minds of those two different people will be very similar words. It's all right to attack lefty lawyers. They obviously don't mean physically, but somebody else takes that word to mean something very different. But there's too many. They're up and down the country. They're all over the place. Some of the names on the list tonight will be in very well-to-do parts of the country. So the idea that people blame their own misfortune on immigrants is absolutely true. But there's an awful lot of people for whom that excuse doesn't hold, I think, now, and that's they're Farage's people.
Yeah, I just think it's really sad. Because, it's like, and then these people feel even more isolated and rejected by society because you see, everyone saying they're, racist thugs and everything, which of course what they're doing is that. But it's just really sad because it's just creating more division. And then you hear people like Braverman saying, horrible things about immigration.
Yeah.
And it sort of just creates more division because they want people in these communities to blame each other, not the government,
Turning poor people of colour against poor white people is an absolute jackpot for entrenched privilege for the ruling classes or the wealthiest classes or whatever you want to call them. It always has been through the ages. It is very sad. And you're referring to things like stop the boats rhetoric and talking. And remember when Jenrick covered up those murals? And that is so dehuman. God, there's so much of it, Noah, that you forget some examples. But imagine what you would have to think about asylum-seeking children. What view you would have of those humans in order to issue an order that some friendly pictures on a wall should be covered up in case the place feels too welcoming for unaccompanied child asylum seekers. And he's now in the running to become the next leader of the Conservative Party.
It's very sad. And I feel like, obviously, because there's so much conflict in the Middle East right now, and that's being sort of shown so much on the news, people develop a negative perception of people from that area when they come here. Yeah.
And it's happening. I mean, there's warnings issued to all sorts of countries about visiting the United Kingdom in 2024. Noah, thank you. I thought that someone had exaggerated when they sent me a message telling me that Nigel Farage had been bigging up Andrew Tate not long ago, describing him as an important voice for young men. But my friend Cormac's just sent me evidence that was true with a photograph as well. So who wouldn't? I don't know when the photograph was taken, to be fair, but I do know this. After Andrew Tate was arrested on human trafficking and organised crime charges, Nigel Farage still thought he would be a good person to trust or to consult on complicated legal matters, just as Alex Jones, the man who claimed that the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax and that all of the grieving, bereaved parents were liars and actors, just as Nigel Farage thought that Alex Jones was a perfectly reasonable person to work with, to collaborate with on air, long after those lies had been perpetrated. It's a bit like every rock you look under with Farage, you discover 1,000 more rocks.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So the question of why did he do it is one that I think we're so used to his mealy-mouthed, disingenuous hate-mongering that we sometimes run the risk of overthinking, and yet at the same time sometimes we miss the questions that we should be asking. Why would you do this? As a serving member of Parliament, why would you wade into a situation that is clearly a potential tinderbox and get your Zippo lighter out? It doesn't really make sense. Again, and I urge you to catch Tom's interview in its entirety from yesterday. Apparently, he rang us up asking to come on. I don't know why he didn't want to come on this show, given that he was keen to talk about me, but perhaps someone can ask him that next time he does an interview. But when Tom asks him about why or what actually happened, you get a very strange interpretation of what the role of a British parliamentarian could and should be.
As you said, some reports suggest...
I asked a very simple question. Was this person known or not? Now,
to the security services.
Absolutely.
And that's a perfectly legitimate question, which was raised by Yvette Cooper. But, Nigel Farage, you didn't just do that, did you? You said some reports suggest he was known to the security services. Those reports were from a fake news website amplified by Russian state TV and, as you mentioned, Andrew Tate. Which ones were you looking at?
Which adds to what I was asking for. Give us some clarity. Had we had... I mean, remember, the London Bridge attacker, we knew within an hour that this person was known to the security services. Whenever in Northern Ireland there was a terrorist outrage, very quickly people were told the background of the perpetrator.
But you didn't
I
just
asked
stop
a
there.
very simple question.
You said some reports suggest he was known to the security services. Those reports were a fake news website, Russian state TV,
Well,
and
I could
Andrew
have
Tate.
said. I could have said.
So which one was it, Nigel Farage?
I could have said some reports suggest he crossed the channel last October. Some reports suggest he's an active
And all of
Muslim.
that was unfounded.
I did none of those things. What I asked for was clarity. We didn't get clarity, and I would argue that what happened in Southport would not have been of the same magnitude had the truth been told, and told very, very quickly. It wasn't for many hours that we learned more.
No, you're right, but that was the chronology of it. But you don't need to amplify the mystery.
I asked the question.
To cite, quotes, some reports suggest the reports are fake, and you accept that now. They're misinformation.
There were thousands of fake reports everywhere.
And you cited
all
them.
of which puts the emphasis on the questions being answered, which they weren't.
So did you accidentally fall for that misinformation?
No, I didn't believe any of it.
Or did you know it was wrong from the get-go?
I hadn't got a clue.
So why did you cite it?
Because the people wanted to know the truth. And if they had known the truth, Tom, the riots would not have been of the same magnitude.
But you're not just people. You are an elected representative of the people in a position...
Representing
in a
a question,
position of authority.
Representing a question that was being asked by millions at the time, which regrettably did not get answered.
Of course, it couldn't be answered if the perpetrator was under 18, and someone who is sometimes rather difficult to shut up on the subject of British laws or foreign judges or whatever the subject may be would surely have a grasp of that most simple element of British law. You cannot name a suspect until, if they're under 18, until a judge has made a rare decision to make an exemption in that case. So I suppose it was the age of the suspect reported at the time. So the one bit of the story that would be true if the age was disseminated by all of these weirdos is the reason why no other information can be provided. So it's not just lying. It's a level of mental manipulation that is, I mean, clearly narcissistic and deeply, deeply dangerous. Deeply dangerous. So why did he do it? Why did he wade in that way as an MP when all it could do was cause enormous trouble? Why do you think he did it? And if you don't think he did it because he wanted some form of revolt, that's a word he likes to use a lot. He wanted some form of revolt. Join the revolt, he likes to say. Well, it's interesting to look up words in the dictionary that you think you know the full meaning of. Why did he do it? Literally, why did he do it? 0345 6060 973. And of course, what he accidentally admitted there was the thing that I talked to an earlier caller about as an elephant in the room. That if the suspect had been an asylum seeker or someone who had crossed the channel in the boat or a Muslim, then he fully contends that the violence of any reaction would be different. It would be greater. I mean, it's incredible, the things he says by accident sometimes, as if a crime is rendered worse by the ethnicity or the origin of the culprit. There's a word for that. It's racism. It's what black person does something, white person does something. It's worse when the black person does it. Riots would be worse if it was actually an asylum seeker. Why? I don't necessarily think that he's wrong, although by the time the judge handed down the exemption, the Farage-flavoured genie was so far out of the bottle that it still hasn't been put back in again. So why did he do it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Richard says you should have asked him why at that point when he said the riots wouldn't have been anything like as severe. You should have said, why not? The implication, as Richard points out, the admission even, is that they wouldn't have torched evangelical churches, which is the reported background of the suspect in the case. Why wouldn't they have torched evangelical churches? 11:25 is the time. Jade's in Glasgow. Jade, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jade.
First-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make the point that on listening to the interview last night, I think there's so much in what Nigel didn't say that's really telling. Exactly what you've been over about, if the police had just been forthcoming with the information, this could all have been prevented.
Who does he think he is, Jade? Who does he think he is? If the entire police service hadn't danced to my tune, then maybe these people wouldn't have set fire to hotels. The man's an absolute menace.
Totally. But also, what he's really saying is, if he told us that he was British or he wasn't a migrant, then this wouldn't have happened, because it's okay for British-born or white males to commit violence against females. That's the real poison in our country. It's the war on women. It's the violence worse. Every day on females.
Yeah, it's worse when someone does it from that background than it is when someone does it from my background. That's the message.
Of course. But the reason why he has done this and why he's using his platform is because he's now in the House of Commons. So it's almost kind of validated his
But that's
position.
That's the opposite to the answer, I think. Because this should be the point at which he stops.
You would think.
Yes.
Yeah, you would think. But no, it's just horrendous. And the audacity that he has to say that as if the police should be answering to him.
I know.
We should be updated. It's ridiculous, and it's just so sad to see what's going on.
So who's around him? Who does his media? Who advises him on this stuff? And they say, okay, you're going to make a little film about it, are you? Where did you get your information from? And he says, Andrew Tate's Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, does he pay people to do his media, to look after his media? Because at that point, but sorry, Nigel, you got it from where? I got Andrew Tate's Twitter. What, and you're going to make it, you're an MP, and you're going to make a little film amplifying claims made by a man in Romania on trial for sex trafficking? Yes, that's the plan. Do you think he has PR advisors? You presume so.
Also, it seems like parallels to Trump as well, with like the insurrection and things like that. I do see similarities between Farage and kind of Trump's.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
But this is our January the 6th. This whole week, really, is violence instigated by political rhetoric, including Nigel Farage's. Not exclusively, I think that's fair to say. But and then seeking to deny any responsibility for it at all. It's absolutely extraordinary. And but I don't see that your answer to the question of why did he do it, the answer can't be because he's an MP. There's got to be more to it than that, hasn't there?
I think obviously his views on race are quite clear, but I do think he has been, I think now that he is an MP, that's given him a little bit more confidence. It's given him a different platform.
Because he's given him respect, given him a form of respectability that he was always desperate for. Like an awful lot of privately educated people who claim to be anti-establishment, they just don't feel that they've managed to get far enough into it and feel sometimes like they're little children with their faces pressed up against the sweet shop window. But by getting into Parliament, it emboldens him rather than teaching him some lessons of responsibility or some of the traditions of parliamentary democracy. It emboldens his grift. It emboldens his race-baiting exaggerations, embellishments and lies. Extraordinary, really. Thank you, Jade. This is what I was talking about earlier in terms of how you are changing the way you live your life as a consequence of what has been unleashed. Hi, James. I am originally from Somaliland. I came to the UK when I was 12 years old. I'm a black man. I'm a Muslim. I live in Wendover, and I'm planning to take my 13-year-old son to the Emirates Stadium to watch Arsenal. But I'm having second thoughts. I'm worried that we may encounter far-right thugs on the trains, and I fear for our safety. I don't want to expose my child to this kind of situation, and I feel powerless and angry. I don't know what to say, except that you will not be alone with those fears. It's 11:30. We'll be joined after the news by Emily Maitlis to discuss Kamala Harris's pick for Vice President, Tim Walz, about whom I probably know about the same as you. I rely entirely upon some journalistic coverage. I'll tell you what he has got. He's got something she's got as well. He seems to be quite happy. Seems to be quite comfortable in his own skin and quite a happy human being. Isn't it odd how rare that has appeared to be in politics on both sides of the Atlantic in recent years? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 33 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Elon Musk all over the news, trying to sort of work out why he's decided to wade into British politics. And we'll never know, of course, but I think he bought Twitter, didn't he, in order to change discourse, in order to steer the entire platform further to the right. So the result of the British election would have been deeply disappointing to him. And, of course, the direction of traffic in America, somewhat unexpectedly, since the decision of Joe Biden to withdraw, has also been away from the far right, away from the sort of nativist howls beloved of Donald Trump and his supporters, and Kamala Harris, the Democrats' candidate for the next American election, yesterday announced her vice presidential running mate. And Emily Maitlis, our resident American politics expert and, of course, the host of the Newsagents podcast and the Newsagents USA, is here to tell us who he is and what this means. Emily, good morning.
Morning, James. I think you said something really spot on a second ago.
First time for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. But you described him as happy in his skin. And I think that is a key component to who Tim Walz is. He is a very canny choice. He's possibly also a chemistry choice. You know, on paper, you can see why Kamala Harris chose him. He's a veteran. You know, she introduced him as a sergeant major at the rally last night. He's also been a football coach, a coach in the school, you know, school kids. He's been a school teacher for 12 years. But I think it's when he starts speaking that you suddenly understand it, because he looks and sounds like the kind of Trump voter that she's trying to win over now. You know, he describes Trump voters as his neighbours, his family members, people he might disagree with, but wants to understand. It's a very, very different tone to, you know, Hillary Clinton's sort of despicables idea that you heard 8 years ago. And I think there is something now in her pick for VP, which is about trying to bring back, I mean, we've heard so much about you know, the 53% in this election so far, the women's vote, you know, women's reproductive rights, women's rights, and how important that is. I think Kamala Harris has made a calculation now. She's kind of getting them back. You know, she's getting the women's vote already. She's getting young women in droves. But now she's after the guys' vote, you know, and he's a guy's guy. She thinks this is a way back to the male vote, possibly.
And as you say, the chemistry is how they appear together. I mean, it does. I mean, it looks like a room you'd quite like to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I heard something which might explain a little bit more of that, which is that she left the choice very late between the last two. And we were looking at Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor, and Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor. And I guess, again, if you go back to paper, Josh Shapiro makes a lot of sense. You know, the governor, very popular governor of an absolutely critical swing state, and he's great on the campaign stump. Everyone kind of says, oh, he sounds just like Obama. You know, he's got all these kind of very good crowd vibes going on. But I understand that actually when she got together in the room with him, it was Shapiro who was saying things like, well, what would I be doing? And what would my task look like? And how would we be playing this? And she kind of didn't want to hear that. You know, she's been the number 2. She wants to be the number 1. And when she got to Tim Walz, he just kind of said, what can I do for you? How can I best help? How could I serve? And I think that may speak to something of the chemistry now. She's been number 2. You know, she's ready to be number 1. And she wants the guy who comes in after her, underneath her, actually, to be just, you know, putting all ego aside and ready to be her vice president. And I think she heard from Walz that maybe everyone says this, but he doesn't particularly have ambitions to be president, which, you know, may change the dynamic a bit as well.
Not that long ago, he wouldn't really have had ambitions to be vice president either, I don't think. It's been an interesting political journey. Is he the fella who first started calling the Republican leadership weird?
We think that that's where it originated.
Because that's really worked, hasn't it?
It's really worked, and it also speaks to the kind of thing that I was trying to enunciate a bit before, which is, I mean, have you watched Fargo? Like, a lot of your listeners will know Fargo, and they know this phrase of Minnesota nice. You know, think somewhere between Frances McDermott, the policewoman, and the girls who are interviewed in the hotel, in the sort of motel afterwards, and they go, hey, he's a kind of funny-looking guy, you know? Funny looking. And I think he's done that with weird. Weird isn't a big, grand, you know, insult. It's just something you can't put your finger on that makes you feel a bit sick. And he's kind of make that spread quite virally. And I think this is, I mean, when you say he doesn't have ambitions, I wouldn't know, because quite frankly, he has played a blinder. In the last 3 weeks, basically since she became the candidate, he has been everywhere and he has been super smart. He has positioned himself very well. And the kind of rhetoric that he uses when he's talking, for example, again, last night, you know, the first rally they did together, when he's talking about abortion rights, and he feels very strongly about abortion rights, he's tried to safeguard them in his state of Minnesota. His own kids were conceived by IVF, which puts him already on a sort of, you know, on a fight with J.D. Vance, who is anti-IVF because it's, you know, the work of the devil, blah, blah, blah. But he was talking yesterday, not in terms of women's rights, which, you know, might be a bit scary to some people out there. He just said, what your neighbor chooses to do is nobody else's goddamn business. And it was a really sharp way, I think, of putting the message back home, which is not, you know, get up on your soapbox and fight for women, which maybe a lot of middle America kind of, you know, a lot of the guys don't particularly want to involve themselves in. But he turns it into a kind of like, you hate politics, I hate politics. Wouldn't it be nice to have politicians that left us alone? And I think that's a much cleverer way of doing body autonomy. You know, if you're trying to sell it to the rural voter, if you're trying to bring back the white guys at the Trump rally, you know, who probably don't really like the idea of a Democrat, have been told that Kamala Harris is a socialist, may have ideas about her race. He's meant to be the kind of guy that says, I'm like you.
So he's not condemning people who hold different opinions. He's merely promoting the notion of live and let live, which is about as close as a politician can get to having their cake and eating it. Will there be a debate with Vance?
I'm sure there will.
I mean, because he is weird. I don't think that's even an opinion. That's almost just an objective statement of fact. That label is hung around his neck now in a way that is going to be impossible to remove.
So there's a couple of things, just sort of social media things that people have been picking up on over the last, 24 hours. One is Tim Walz positioning himself stroking a cat. Right. I don't know where that photo came from, but clearly the idea is that, he is a cat laddie, and Kamala might be her cat lady, and JD Vance does not seem to like cats. You know, it's been completely taken away out of context from whatever the hell JD Vance was doing with that weird thing when he was insinuating that people without children don't really care about their country. But he's kind of just slipped that in, you know, I'm a safe pair of hands. The other thing he did last night was he talked about being willing to debate Vance if he would get up off his couch. Now, for most people, that will just be a completely normal way of saying, you know, if he dares come to the wicket, come to meet me. But anyone who's been seeing the viral memes about JD Vance and what he did or didn't do to his own sofa, I should say completely false, complete disinformation, completely fabricated. It was just a meme that got out of hand. But you feel that Walz is kind of having a bit of mischief. You know, he's kind of throwing one out to the crowd. And when he said it, I was looking at Kamala Harris's reaction. She's like, oh, my God, he went there. Should he have gone there? I don't know if she should have gone there. You know, my sense would be... But he
can do that as a deputy, can't he?
He can just about do that. I mean, I think he's probably got to stay the right side of... you know, kind of let's bans, and let's not actually spread disinformation about a guy when there's plenty of real stuff to go on anyway. But I think it allows her to be squeaky clean. She can play the whole Michelle Obama, you know, when they go low, we go high. She can go high, and she knows that he's coming in just below, spotting all the places where he can go slightly weird, you know, which line. I think is probably going to work for her in a way that, and going back to the Shapiro thing, Shapiro, you know, the guy that many people are saying, why didn't she pick Josh Shapiro? You know, he's got this, he's a governor, she needed Pennsylvania. He's also a former attorney general. And I just can't help thinking that if you have two former AGs on the ticket, starts to look like a lawyer's joke. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's kind of, it starts to look a bit like, we're out to get Trump. We know, you know, we're going to lock him up. It's kind of funny for about 5 minutes. And then it starts to look like, really? Are all your friends lawyers? And I think what she's done with Walz is choose a totally different vibe. Now, look, maybe the vibes thing doesn't last them forever. Right? Maybe
that was going to be my final question, because she's certainly enjoying a bounce now, and Walz has contributed considerably to the bounce.
Yeah, I mean, she is up in the polls, I think, 9 points amongst millennials and Gen Zers, which is big, but arguably, you know, that's not how the polls work in America. It has to be the swing states. What does Walz manage to contribute? Does he manage to bring in voters from the areas that she really needs, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania? Does she manage to bring, as I say, the male voters back? And I would say, when you look at presidential strategy, look at the campaign merch. The first thing that has come out of that rally is a hunting hat, which says Walz Harris. Now, Walz is also a hunter. You know, he gave an interview. Ice fishing and pheasant. Yes. You know, he says I've shot more pheasant than JD Vance. Now, if you are appealing to gun owners, if you're appealing to men, if you're appealing to the rural voters who, you know, Biden was never going to really kind of get their juices going, you know, but suddenly you put a guy who knows how to wield a gun or what do they use in ice fishing? Is it a spear or a rod? I don't know. We'll have to go and ask Tim Walz. But you sort of see where she wants this campaign to go now, kind of heartland stuff in the sort of Great Lakes areas, you know. These are the places. Yeah, she wants.
Absolutely fascinating. I don't like messages like this, Emily Maitlis, but you'll see that I have to read it out from Matt. He says, I could listen to Emily all day. She's brilliant. Please pass it on, mate.
Oh, thanks, Matt.
Consider it passed on. Emily Maitlis. Many thanks. Emily will be recording a Newsagents later today. It will be available shortly afterwards, of course. It is 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A little bit more on what we think Farage is playing at, or was playing at, when he elected to amplify nonsense brought to his attention by a man on trial for sex trafficking and organised crime. What on earth was going on in his mind? And then for the final hour of the programme, we'll have a look, I think, at how recent events have changed the way you feel about your country, changed the way that you're living your life. We've been nibbling at the edge of that question since Monday, but we'll hopefully get stuck into it completely after 12.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will spend another 10 minutes or so examining the fairness or otherwise of the sobriquet Farage riots for the recent events that have blighted so many communities up and down the country, and also ask what we think he was playing at when he decided to take to social media to amplify utterly baseless claims made by, and this is the bit I couldn't believe in yesterday's interview with Tom, even if it was true, you wouldn't admit it, would you, publicly, that you're going to a man facing trial for sex trafficking in Romania for your information about what the security services are up to in England? And what on earth was he playing at? And is it fair, therefore, to call them the Farage riots? Peter is in Whitehaven. Peter, sorry to keep you. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think the why, I think he's been very clear about himself, that you look at the election, he was talking about he was driving a change. So he wants to change the political landscape. And you use the word yourself about effectively wanting, unrest and conflict and...
Well, he would of course deny that, but we're just asking questions. We're just speculating on what might be going on beneath his grubby old bonnet.
And I think the interesting thing then is looking at the way he's going about doing it and what will happen next.
Right.
So he's clearly built on the issue that you raised on Monday, that there's this massive issue of uncontrolled migration and the impact it has.
Yes.
Whether it's true or not doesn't matter.
Yes.
That stokes people. So you've stoked that there's a big issue. The next thing that we were hearing was we're not being listened to. How many people rang your show and others to say we're not being listened to?
Yeah,
so
not that many to mine, sadly, but I think everybody else still gets plenty of them.
Because we're not being listened to.
Yeah, and then you ask them to explain. Here you are on national radio, speaking to over 1 million people, but you're not being listened to. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, and the next thing is that you're not being told the truth. So the issue about the Southport incident.
Yes.
Now, you point about, why would you use disingenuous information? Your book covers why disingenuous information's had an impact, so that's why you do it. So there you've got those three things then. You've got big issue, not being listened to, not being told the truth. The next step was the one in the last couple of days, two-tier. So not only all of that, but you're being treated less favourably than others.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And then the next one, and the one that's to come, and I'll guarantee it, the one that's to come is when they hand out the sentences that are probably likely to be quite harsh later this week or early next week, the next thing you'll be saying, by making a statement without making a statement, will be, and now look what's happening. The state, through the courts and the heavy-handed criminal justice system, are now seeking to gag you.
Or they're biased against white thugs.
Absolutely, and it's another
brown
division
thugs
about not being
brown thugs wouldn't. That's why they've had to desperately try to inflate the absolutely appalling scenes in Birmingham, but incomparable to what we've seen in the rest of the country. Desperately trying to inflate that to claim some sort of.
And remember, it's not just the few mindless thugs committing violence that he's trying to appeal to. There were millions of people in this country voted for reform. So he's trying to garner a groundswell of change that will add to his political capital. That's what he's interested in, I think.
Do you know, I haven't played it yet, but someone sent me a clip in which he apparently talks about having the scenes could help him politically, or words to that effect. No, I don't know what that means or what that refers to, but that would fit in with, I think, what you're describing. We'll see, won't we, what the next bit is? Because he seemed quite rattled yesterday with Tom, and that would speak to perhaps a feeling that he's not got control of the narrative, and the idea that people can clearly see a link between the sort of nonsense that he was spouting and sharing and the reaction on the streets of various towns and cities across the country. He's not in control of that, trying to sort of silence people from making those points, or even in Tom's case, reading his own words back to him. It isn't quite working as he might have hoped.
No, and that's because in Tom's case, he doesn't look. What he's trying to do is, he's good at it. He's using very clever but pernicious language in a clever way. He doesn't like it when that gets played back to him in a way that says, I can see this is clever and pernicious.
Yes.
And then he gets on the defensive.
That's right, yeah. And that's when I think he told Tom he needs to get out more at some point, because Tom was questioning some of the claims that he was making. Peter, thank you. It was certainly worth the wait for me, but I know you were there before I started speaking to Emily a moment ago. I've got the quote here. I guess there are some who are frightened that politically one day I could benefit from what is going on. What does that mean then? I guess there are some who are frightened that politically I could benefit one day from what is going on. He said that in another interview where he couldn't stop talking about me. But hey-ho. Thank you, Peter. Let's go to Sheffield. Nadia is there. Nadia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I was just going to say, I think that the thing with Nigel is that he knows his audience, and that's why he's sort of taken to social media, because he knows that people are looking for a reason to justify their racism. And I feel that all that Nigel cares about is his popularity, so he's going to say whatever he needs to say on social media to make these people who are racist and xenophobic feel like he relates to them.
But that is a distillation of his entire life. That's not, I mean, I'm specifically looking, and it may be that you're right and I'm overthinking things, but for an MP to do what he did last Tuesday it's of a different order to the entire lifetime, the entire career of sowing racist seeds and then running away when they sprout. So, I mean, this is of a different order entirely. This is feigning ignorance of British law. This is amplifying the words of a man on trial for sex trafficking. It's almost as if I want to know what happened when he told someone what he was planning to do, and they said, "You're doing what?" And he just said, "Oh no, what you don't understand is that this is a really clever thing to do because." And I don't know what comes after that because.
I think he's just got so wrapped up in his own bubble.
Yes.
And I think he's too far removed now from thinking about any sense of what he's saying. And I think you and I can see that he's clearly crossed a line there. But I think in the moment, he probably was just so wrapped up in it. And I think that's why he's so cross about the name Farage riots now.
Yes, because it's something that's backfired.
Yeah, I think he truly did not believe that this would go beyond that controversial online discourse.
Right. Well, in that case, then in a way you're agreeing with him that it's not fair to blame the riots on him.
No, I think I believe it's fair because I think I can see as an outsider that he's being a bit sick.
Yes.
But I think that's why he's so upset, because I feel like he's almost shocked himself with his own behaviour. And I think that's why to everybody else it seems so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, yes, maybe. And if there's no one in the room telling you that you're being an idiot or that this is a really bad idea, or if your narcissism is of such an extraordinary nature that you honestly think you're a genius in all given situations, then deciding to take to social media while the country is reeling from the brutal murder of 3 little girls and amplify nonsense being spouted by a man on trial for sex trafficking would perhaps make perfect sense to you if you were in those circumstances. Thank you, Nadia. I didn't pick Nadia up and an earlier caller on the use of the Christian name in that sort of bonhomie way, because the content of the conversation was clearly anything but that I will in future steer people away, just as we did with Johnson, steer people away from the softening nature of using just the first name to talk about a politician. It's coming out to 11:57. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Azam is in Leeds. Azam, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
Do you know what? I think we're not giving him enough credit here, and he's got a definite plan. So after the elections, the right-wing government, people have clearly wanted change and have got rid of the right-wing government. He's also managed to, I think even surprise himself, managed to get a seat and become a member of parliament. So now this is a deliberate plan to undermine the current government, what he would call left-wing government, and to try and cause as much chaos and justify his seat. And my people are backing me. So he doesn't care about lying and not telling the truth and being pulled up on it. None of them do. Nobody does. Politicians don't care about that anymore. So him having to take a backward step and admit anything It doesn't make a difference to them because the media will always support them. But he now has to undermine everything that the Labour government would do in the future, what's coming up, and he has to rally his troops and cause as much civil unrest as possible and spew as much hate as he can. And I think we're overlooking that fact. You know, he's going to use whatever means necessary, whether that may be Andrew Tate or whether it's Tommy Robinson. They're trying to rally the people who probably didn't even go and vote, let's face it, these people that are having the riots and attacking innocent people.
Well, some of them did. We know that one of the people who pleaded guilty to violent disorder in Liverpool yesterday was out canvassing for Nigel Farage's party in April. So some of them will definitely have voted. But I'm not entirely. I think we all need. This isn't a criticism of you. It's just a caution for both of us. We need to steer a little clear of some of the sort of stereotyping of people that we think perhaps aren't as clever as we are or aren't as well educated as we are. But I do understand what you're driving at.
I think it's. So I'm just going to tell you this. I'm a Muslim. I live in Leeds. I am 43 years old. I was born in Leeds in St James's Hospital. My children were born in Leeds at St James's Hospital. A couple of months ago, I was in the King's New Year's Honours List. I went to Buckingham Palace to receive a British Empire Medal. My situation today is I was summer holidays. I wanted to take my children to the cinema to go watch a movie.
Yeah.
But because there's a planned riot at 1 o'clock outside one of the government offices, I'm also a civil servant.
Right.
So staff have been sent home. And now I'm not taking my children to the cinema because I'm fearful of what might happen to me and my children. I can't protect them in that situation. So I'm staying well clear of that area. Also, my son, it's the summer holidays. He booked yesterday to go temping bowling with his friends, all different backgrounds. And I've had to tell him today, I don't think you should go to city centre because of the planned riots. And that's how I'm living my life at the moment. And like I said, I'm a civil servant. I was in the King's New Year's Honours List for charity work that I've done in my local community and everybody from every background. I'm now having to tell my children in the summer holidays that we can't go certain places and they can't go and enjoy themselves. That's the current state that I'm living in. And and this is where somebody has to be held accountable. When Nigel Farage is spewing hate and causing these problems, it has to stop somewhere, and we can't allow that to continue when that's my situation, my reality, and I now don't know what to do.
Hang in there is all I can say. I wish I could say more, but I can't dispute you. I wish I could say I think you're overreacting or I think you shouldn't be, worried about this. But how on earth can you when you've seen the scenes that we've all seen and they've happened on your doorstep?
My father is a taxi driver, and they are literally, when you've seen some of the scenes where they've been stopping taxis and let me see your background and pulling people out, and I've had to tell them, please be careful. All my family members, were in WhatsApp groups telling each other, please be careful, stay away from this area, this is going on. We're having to report hourly and daily on what's going on and how to protect ourselves.
And that is going to be the conversation we have in the next hour. So thank you for queuing it up, as it were, but I'm so sorry that you're in such a powerful position to do so. That's a big turnaround, isn't it, from being at the Palace to get your British Empire Medal for services to charity to being too frightened to take your children to the cinema. Exactly. And and I'm sat here I don't quite know how to take it and how we go forward, but I just think at some stage, especially politicians, they have to be held accountable. I mean, even I think LBC Radio, your replacement last week was Swella Breverman. Why on earth would they have to replace your show to have somebody like that to come and spew more hate? It doesn't make any sense. Why are we giving these people a platform? There's freedom of speech and freedom to offend people are two different things. I couldn't argue with the last bit that you said. The answer to the first bit is that she's a former Home Secretary. So she's prominent. She's a prominent public figure. I despise many of the things that she said and many of the things that she stands for. And when I'm not here, I've got no editorial control over what happens on the programme. But it isn't as if it's not as if they put Tommy 10 names on the radio. She is an elected. No. She's an elected politician and a former Home Secretary. So,
but that when you think about it and you put it in that way, doesn't that just make it all the more scarier just to think that this was somebody in that position? And that's why.
And she's been very quiet. She's been very. She jumped all over marches that were demonstrating solidarity with people facing senseless death in Gaza. She described them as hate marches, and yet she's had, as far as I'm aware, nothing at all to say about these scenes.
And so many of them have stayed quiet, and so many of these people that were calling out hate marches are deathly quiet.
And police held her personally responsible for attacks on them around the time of the Remembrance Sunday.
And that was while she was still in her position.
Yeah, that's right.
Still in her position.
That's right.
That's why I'm saying it's scary when you think that, well, hang on a minute, that was somebody who has such rule over the country, and the police are calling her out direct for it.
And here we are now. It's the lefty lawyers, and again the same language used to describe lawyers, described by lawyers, including conservative legal brains like Dominic Grieve and I think Edward Garnier, warning against what would happen if you used this sort of rhetoric. And today, far right terrorists are intending to target law firms. Before we go, Azam, my dad was born in Jimmy's as well.
There you go. Yeah, no. Well, I'm 3 generations of us. I've got literally doctors, teachers, university professors in my family who've contributed massively to society. My granddad came here in the late 60s and worked in mines, and we've always contributed. The charity work that I do during lockdown, we were having 250 food parcels for local children who were not getting the free school meals. We did Christmas meals in local old people's home. That's the kind of stuff that we were doing. And then to now I'm scared for my child to go into the city centre in case of something happens.
This too will pass. That's a mealy words, inadequate words, but this too will pass. Azam, take care, mate. It is 4 minutes after 12. A little late for the news, but some breaking news for you. Derek Drummond, a 58-year-old from Southport, has just been sentenced to 3 years at Liverpool Crown Court for violent disorder and assaulting a police officer during rioting in Southport last week. I can tell you who won't be going to visit him.
James O'Brien on LBC.
8 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think Azam's story there, and it wasn't in the first instance what he rang in to talk about, but just revealing the details of the differences he has made to his daily life as a consequence of terror, of being terrorised by the kind of people who have been rioting, the kind of people who were out canvassing for reform in April, in the case of one of the rioters who pleaded guilty to violent disorder in Liverpool yesterday. And I want to know what differences you are making to your life as a consequence of fear. And I don't like using the word fear because no one wants to say I'm scared, or at least a lot of us have been raised in a way that makes you think that that's a sign of weakness or something like that. But it's daft. There's nobody alive who could take on single-handedly 100 petrol bomb-throwing morons. It's just not doable. You got your children with you, and you're at home. You're not. What can you do? I told you the interview I heard on Monday morning of the 17-year-old girl. They were all sort of hiding upstairs, locked all the doors, drew down the curtains, pulled down the blinds, and watched on TikTok as the sort of marauding mob made its way up their own street, and tried to kick the front door in. What are you going to do? Of course, one of the things, and I think a Labour MP is pointing out this, you have to leave the police to deal with this. Scenes from Birmingham yesterday where people were poised to take the law into their own hands to defend their community and ended up committing crimes themselves. Well, I think committing crimes themselves. Arrests have been made there. And, of course, the far right and their friends in the British media will be desperate to pretend that somehow provides an equivalence to trying to burn asylum seekers in a Tamworth hotel to death. But the point, of course, is that people will be terrorised. They will be frightened. And I want you to know how you are accommodating that, what changes you are making to your life as a consequence of terror on the streets of Britain. 0345 6060 973. A couple of early answers to this question that we've touched on during the course of the week. The first one I saw was on Monday on Twitter when a father used very fruity language to articulate what he felt about the people who had terrorised his son's friend's father. A message came through to his lad from his mate saying, I can't come to football. My dad doesn't want me to leave the house. That was in an area where a riot had occurred. And the phrase the father used in the tweet that I saw was F you, Nazi scum or something like that. It's hard to argue with that kind of response. We just heard from Azam. We've heard from a few other people already this week. It's only the third day of the week, about the changes that they are making in their life. And now I'd like to hear from you. So you know that tonight, for example, there are reports of I think 30, 40 something facilities being targeted, addresses being published, and warnings that far right websites are offering up instructions on how to make weapons, how to evade detection, all of these terrorist tactics now in sort of open view, and therefore people adjacent to or in the environs of those addresses will be terrified, will be terrorized. That's a better word to use, I think, terrorized. And so what are you doing as a consequence? Have you, like Azam, decided to curtail your children's social life? Not going to go out. Didn't go out, have cancelled your plans, have done things different from what you would otherwise have done as a direct consequence of being terrorised. And of course, we mentioned yesterday, there's two countries. There's the parts of it, mercifully small parts of it, where it's happening. And then there's the rest of us who have had our experience of it confined to media coverage. So, it might not make sense to some of us who've had our experience of it confined to media coverage at first glance to hear about someone deciding not to go to the cinema. But this is particularly, pertinent when you look at the question of what the ramifications are, the ripple effect. You throw the rock. If you see the riots as a rock, it's been tossed into the pond of British life. And then you find yourself wondering just how far those ripples reach. So that's what I want next. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Give me a call and just talk me through how this is affecting you, either emotionally or materially, in terms of how you are living your life and how you are adjusting your plans. I'm also interested in whether there's been a change in tone, whether there's been a shift in the way you feel some of your colleagues perhaps are looking at you, or a shift in how you feel, how comfortable you feel in certain contexts, in certain environments, whether or not things have changed. There you go. As ever, it took me 10 minutes to get there. What's changed and what's changing and what changes have you made? Oh, went a bit David Bowie there, which is never a bad thing. He had something to say about riots, He was only a kid when they happened. I think there were some riots in the 50s. And I'll find you the quote, actually. That's probably the best thing to do, rather than drag some bowdlerised, completely bogus version of it up from the fetid reaches of my own memory bank. I'll find you the quote and I'll share it with you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:15. I found the quote. I bet you thought I wouldn't, didn't you? Yeah. So 1958 were the riots. Bowie would have been a young boy at the time, but he said latterly, I remember the riots. I remember mainly the prison sentences they handed out afterwards. 10 years, incredible sentences. And all of a sudden, there weren't any white thugs wanting to go down to Notting Hill to cause trouble. So it'd be nice to see some history repeated there, although some of you have expressed already some unhappiness with that 3-year sentence that's just been handed down to one of the participants in the Southport riots. Quite a few of you, including Caroline, pointing out you can get 5 years for a Zoom call planning a peaceful demonstration, but 3 years for rioting, referencing recent sentencing of Just Stop Oil activists. The problem there, and I am explaining, not excusing, because it feels to me like unnatural justice, but the law is the law, and I think they were either mostly or entirely already on bail, on bail for other offences. So the sentencing guidelines are pretty clear, and we're not comparing apples with apples when we say how can someone get 3 years for rioting and 5 years for planning a peaceful protest against fossil fuel companies or against climate change. So just explaining, not excusing by any stretch of the imagination. 12:17 is the time. So what differences are you making? Some strange responses coming in already that I wasn't necessarily expecting. This is from Darren, who's in Barnsley. Six weeks holidays just started. I'm ensuring my family aren't going anywhere near town and city centres. James, I hate doing this, but I don't want my daughter to be close to any trouble. She got scared on Sunday because the Rotherham trouble was 2 miles away, and we regularly walk around the lake at Manvers and get ice cream. We won't be doing that for a while. I'm white British, James. God knows what people of colour are feeling. 12:17 is the time. Stell's in Willesden Green. Stell, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to probably trip over my words, so I do apologise in advance.
Take your time. Don't apologise.
Listen, seeing what's happened, I'm Greek. My parents came over here from Cyprus in the early 60s. I was born in this country, born and raised. I remember the 70s. I remember sort of going through the 70s, and there was National Front and racism that was happening then, and it was quite prevalent on football pitches or in football terraces, should I say. And I'm an avid football fan. I support a team who has got a bit of a history with that kind of background.
Okay.
And my concern is I mean, I get away with it. I'm slightly darker skinned than the normal white person, but I can still be seen as someone of an ethnic background.
Right, yeah.
And my concern is that this may spill over onto the football terraces again. We had the real bad problems in the past with football violence at grounds. And it's a real concern for me that, with the football season coming up, starting with the Championship this Saturday and then the Premier League the following Saturday is...
Well, I don't know, because, I mean, it is... The pitched battles, as it were, of hooliganism are... I know some of the firms still exist, but the clubs have done so much to keep them out of the stadia. And although you occasionally get tear-ups, a couple of miles from the ground, which have been pre-arranged by, I don't want to say consenting adults, but they're not acts of terror anymore, because the only people caught up in it are the people who are participating in it, as it were. But I'm more optimistic than you, probably because I'm a Kidderminster Harriers fan, Stale, and we never...
Well, I've been to your ground, so
have you?
It was quite a pleasant experience.
Yes,
yeah.
It is. It is a pleasant experience, but let's just hope that your fears prove to be unfounded. But hooliganism, very much a part of what we've been seeing. The kind of people who would once have been tearing up seats at football stadiums and throwing them at each other or throwing them at the other side. It's the same sort of feral breakdown, isn't it, that we've seen on streets up and down the country, although thankfully so far London has been spared some of all of the worst examples. Still, take care. Daniel's in Manchester. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous, but
it's all right. It's only me.
Basically, I think the point I want to make is what I've experienced personally. I'm a white man married to a black Caribbean woman. I've got my trace kids.
Oh, yeah.
And yesterday, I loathe to say this because we're almost letting them win by making this phone call. And I imagine the tiny Tommy and his cheerleaders will be enjoying listening to all our stories now, and I do know what you mean. Growing up as a lifelong anti-racist, you spend all your time fighting this, and you're proud of the fact that people integrate in this country, and they're loving to see this division, and then we're ringing up saying how frightened we are, but we are changing our life. And a little example of what happened with us yesterday: we were down in Devon, and travelling up, we stopped in Western-super-Mare, and we were walking along the prom then, and I said to my wife at the time, I said, "Do you feel this? Do you feel frightened? Are you distrusting of everyone?" And she's like, yeah, I do feel like that. And and you're thinking, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. Do you know what I mean? And my whole life, and the world that we kind of grew up in, with all the terror threats that the media always posed to us, that we have to be scared of everyone who was different almost, and you were frightened to go into city centres. And I've lived in near city centres my whole life. I never ever felt that way, but I think now that we are starting to feel that way, and like I said, even to the point as a white male, I'm looking at other, and it's terrible to say this and I'm ashamed to say it, but as a white male, I'm looking at other white people almost bigoted myself by thinking, if anyone who's cast an eye towards my family, why are they looking at them?
Are you one of them? Are you one of them? I don't know that you should necessarily feel ashamed about that, because and the reason you do is because you know that they almost certainly won't be. But the scale of the riots, the numbers that we've seen, the impunity with which they have been behaving just does make you wonder about that fella sitting over there, doesn't it? Or that would you be there if you had the chance? That's what you're thinking. Would you be one of those people?
And I think what's crazy, I through the fire service last year, I volunteered to go to Calais to work with Care for Calais with the migrants, and you see the conditions that people are living in. And I remember a guy we were speaking to. He said to me, when we're talking to them, because we were putting these debate subjects to them and saying, all you ever hear off the right in England is, oh, why have you gone through all these countries? Yeah. And a man turned around to me and he said, because, he goes, the thought of coming to England, he said, you're so welcoming. He said, we know you're good people. And he said, and when you heard that, you're almost shuddered then, because I think we almost live in this myth, don't we, that this is just happening now, where I think this idea that this trope that's been sold for years now, it's better, racism in England is better than it's ever been. And I never truly believe that, because I think people of colour in this country can't truly believe that, because everyone's got their individual stories and experiences, and I think it's just been driven underground, where now we've seen it, it's back over ground again. We're back to seeing this.
And you never know. I saw Tony Benn was always very strong on this, about there's no, because you think you've won or you think the battle's over. It's never over. There's these vile impulses are always there, and all it takes is a flashpoint or a clever manipulator of public feeling to come along and blow their faggy breath all over those embers until they take flame, and then we see what we've been seeing. I don't know, though, about... I don't know if you're up for a laugh, Daniel, but Matt's been in touch to say I always feel like that in Weston-super-Mare, to be fair. It's just, I don't know if that's the time or the place to stop. Way, go on.
I'm not... again, you don't want to name places, almost to say that there's nothing against the people there, and we're nothing but kind.
Exactly.
And, exactly. I want to put that on record. This isn't... It's not about places, and it's sad, because I said to my sister-in-law yesterday, when, like the gentleman said before about WhatsApps, that's exactly what our WhatsApps are looking like. Everyone's talking about what we're not doing, where not to go, sharing and like we've talked about before, people say about social media, it's dangerous both sides. You see some of these videos and you don't know whether they are genuine stories of people, being attacked. But, there were stories yesterday in Manchester of people throwing acid through car windows. Again, you don't know whether it's true, but this is what happens, doesn't it?
They weren't true. And actually, Lennon spread a couple of stories, one from Stirling and one from somewhere else that were also untrue. I suppose we should just be grateful that Nigel Farage hasn't started asking questions about those blatant lies as well. Do you think the tide's gone out? The tide has come in very quickly for you and your family. How long do you think it's going to take to go out again? The tide of these feelings that you describe.
Do you know what? It's hard to say, because I think big part of our family culture, we go to Carnival every year. We have that's where me and my wife actually met in London at London Carnival, and we always go leave, take the kids now, and again the stories of the media will pose the day after. We've always felt it to be an unbelievable event, but we're now saying we're not going to go this year, and then because it's almost, we know them places are going to be targeted, and the thing is, this isn't just going to be a flash in the pan, I don't believe, because I think this underlying current has existed for so long. When you hear it, don't you? Let's be honest. And I've always said, with family and even colleagues in the fire service when I work there, and especially black colleagues, who you almost see it almost when you look like me, because I'm a shaven head white man. I walk into them rooms where people, or you get into a place where people look at you and they don't know yet, they don't know your background, and they almost say the things they want to say that they haven't been saying, and you almost feel like this underlying current. I've heard it my whole life. It's just that people, my personal belief, and again I might be wrong, that this has been teetering on the edge, and then I don't need to say what you've always said. The Tories have stirred it up, the Rwanda nonsense, the small boats nonsense, and it's almost hit a perfect storm, hasn't it? But they're getting brave, and I think the bravery of these people now to, the way
it's not. I know what you mean. It's not bravery. It's cowardice, but they're emboldened.
Exactly, but you know what? Sorry, my language is probably wrong. I don't mean that.
I'm being a pedant. I'm being a hair splitter, but I don't know why. But that one just that got my antennae twitching.
Yeah, you know where they're almost brave enough to come out the shadows now. Where
brazen, you know, brazen's the word we want.
Yeah,
there we go.
Brazen. Yeah, and you know where you think like.
I don't know. We'll see, and that's why. And I think perhaps we haven't done enough of this. That's why the role that the police are playing and have to play is so absolutely crucial to keep our society safe, to keep our families safe, to say goodbye to this tide of fear and terrorise. A sense of being terrorised that has come in so quickly in the space of a week. To get it to go back out again is on politicians, of course, but the police officers who are doing this, which makes, thank you, Daniel, which makes the deliberate maligning of the police that Farage has been indulging in, to return to the conversation of the first 2 hours, so utterly disgusting. It's just reminded me of something. If you want to have a smile, I've got a story you might quite like. You've probably heard it before, to be honest. I've only got about 8 stories. I recycle them endlessly. But Daniel talking about being judged by his appearance, being, having a shaven-headed white man, and therefore people perhaps leaping to certain conclusions. And the caller before that talking about the football and being, where it was Stell, wasn't it? Being worried about going to the football and how the hooliganism, which always had some elements of hooliganism, always had very close links to the far right, maybe undergoing something of a resurrection. We have to hope not. But I remember being in a pub near the Brentford ground a couple of seasons ago, pre-season game against West Ham, and I forgot there was a game on, so we're having breakfast or brunch or whatever you want to call it. I was having a full English. There you go. I was having a full English in a lovely pub on the river in Chiswick, just near where the Brentford football ground is, the new Brentford football ground. And about halfway through my black pudding, a couple of hundred West Ham fans pile into the pub for pre-game pints. And there are 2 of them sitting at the table at about 2 o'clock from where I'm sitting. And I'm facing them, and none of the other family noticed. And I know they've clocked me. I know they've clocked me they've recognised me. And I'm a bit worried because they've got the sort of 18-hole Doc Martin boots on, and they've got that khaki green, that sort of olive green bomber jacket, and they've both got shaven heads. And I'm, rightly or wrongly, there's a little bit of me that's thinking, oh dear, I hope they aren't going to be mean to me, or I hope they're not going to object to some of my politics, perhaps. But I know they've clocked me. I wasn't being cocky, and I kind of conscious of it for the rest of my meal. And we're getting ready to leave. We stand up, put my jacket on, and as we're leaving, I hear this shout across the room. And I hear someone say, "Oi, James!" like this. And I think, oh, aye, here we go. And I'm sort of thinking, I hope the family keep moving. And I turn around, and it's the 2 gentlemen that I'd clocked earlier in the big Doc Martin boots and the green bomber jackets and the shaven heads. And I go, yeah, all right. And one of them opens his green jacket like this. I don't say like this, I'm on the radio. Unless you're watching on YouTube, in which case don't forget to subscribe and hit those likes. And it's the middle of the pub, absolutely rammed with West Ham fans. Opens up his green bomber jacket like this. Do you know what it says on his T-shirt? I can't tell you what it says on his T-shirt because one of them was a swear word, but I will give you a slightly sanitised version of what it said on his T-shirt. The fellow that I was worried might be a kind of my kind of politics person, anti-me kind of. So opening, oi, James! I go, yeah, all right. Opens up his jacket and it says, Rolex to Brexit. And there you go. So don't judge a book by its cover, lads. Here's Amelia Cox with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are looking at changes that you are making to your life, or changes that have already unfolded about the way you feel about your life, about your country, about your community, your home, your family, as a consequence of seeing these outpourings of vicious, virulent and often violent hatred, racist hatred pouring out upon the streets of Great Britain. I'm going to talk next to the journalist Lizzie Dearden, who is something of an expert in the field of home affairs and security. She's written a book called Plotters, the UK Terrorists who failed. And she's someone that we often talk to about things that pop up into public discourse, but which have often been bubbling away below the surface for some time. And I wanted to ask you, Lizzie, today about this phrase two-tier policing. I mean, one thinks immediately of stop and search, particularly in London, being an absolute demolition of the idea that people of colour somehow get better treatment from police officers than white people do. But it's gathered quite a momentum this week, certainly on social media. Some people in traditional media and even in politics using it to claim precisely that people from ethnic minorities somehow get an easy ride from the British police. The phrase has a history, I gather.
It does. And thanks for having me on, James. But this is a phrase which has been circulating among far-right groups in the UK for at least 5 years. And it links to much wider conspiracy theories and kind of narratives that far-right groups put forward, which broadly claim that white people are being deliberately disadvantaged or even replaced in Britain through some level of conspiracy involving the government and different authorities and different religious groups. And so when people say two-tier policing to an average member of the public this week, it may be the first time they've ever heard this term, but actually it links into much wider extremist narratives. And what's being done now is an attempt by all kinds of different groups in the far right to use the disorder and the way they're being policed over the past few days to kind of get that concept into the mainstream and then to flip it and use it to draw people kind of into their world and into their arguments by saying, we've been saying this for years, look at this. And they basically take a very selective and misleading reading of news events all around the world to create this idea that white people are over-policed or dealt with differently when, of course, all the statistics show the opposite.
I mentioned stop and search. You could also, I presume, look at deaths in police custody and all sorts of measurable statistics. But as with quite a lot of issues adjacent to far-right politics, it's hard to unpick the desire to believe things that are demonstrably untrue. We've seen an awful lot of that this week. So if I've understood you correctly, this plays into what I think they call the great replacement theory.
Yes, it can do. And for some people it does. I mean, different far-right groups have different aims, but the white nationalists, the most virulent racist kind of groups do believe in that theory that there is a conspiracy to replace white people in the UK and other kind of Western nations with black and brown people from around the world. And they haven't just used the idea of two-tier policing, they've used the idea of a whole two-tier load of things to kind of further this idea that white people are essentially under some global form of attack. And they are using the events at the moment to try and call for mass deportations and just trying to radicalise people and mainstream their ideas in a way that they haven't really had the chance to since the 2017 terror attacks, when there was also a kind of wave of public sadness and grief and anger and emotion, which these groups always try and profit off.
It's presumably had its most, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, highest impact in the last week than it has at any other point in the previous 4 or 5 years. It's moved front and centre, hasn't it, in recent days?
Yeah, it seems to. I've certainly never seen this kind of discussion of the concept of two-tier policing in the mainstream before. This seems to be a real moment for that. But certainly a lot of the other stuff going on feels a lot older. This sort of broad presentation of Muslims and immigrants and migrants as a threat, both as a kind of physical threat and as a cultural threat to the UK. That's something that's been going on for very many years, and we see these kind of ebbs and flows. The last peak in recorded hate crime in the UK was after the 2017 terror attacks. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if when all the figures come in and all the maths has kind of been done, if we're about to see a similar one now.
What's the end game? Is there an end game? I mean, or does it just sort of peter out again, never go away, and then when the next flashpoint occurs, it comes back up again? Because I think Robert Jenrick used the phrase when he was talking about the pro-Palestinian protests. I mean, whether or not he realised how obnoxious he was being is a question for the ages. But you watch a protest with which you disagree, and people aren't getting arrested much because there isn't much criminality or disruption, and then you watch a protest with which you do agree and there's loads and loads of arrests. You're the person that's going to be susceptible to the suggestion that this is a deliberate bias or that this is two-tier policing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even now, although it's many years later, a lot of the people who are in these networks point at Black Lives Matter and say, "Oh, that was a violent group. Why weren't they arrested?"
Farage did that earlier this week, didn't he? He suggested that it stemmed from precisely that period.
Yeah, I didn't hear that, but I'm not surprised. Actually, it doesn't. It goes back until at least 2019, which was, of course, before the death of George Floyd and the protest that follows that. So this is something that's been amplified by events that people have interpreted in a certain way, but it's a much older theory, and it is explicitly a far-right narrative. And I suspect that a lot of people discussing it don't understand that, but they probably should. Because,
yes, that's often the case. Sorry.
Yeah, and this is a kind of deliberate jumping off point that far-right groups are hoping for people to use to expose people to a much wider and deeper range of sort of racist and Islamophobic ideas.
A gateway.
And at the moment it seems to be kind of working for them.
And I mean, I covered the Black Lives Matter march. Quite a lot of allegations of heavy-handed policing. I mean, they sent the horses in, I think, which hardly ever happens in matters of public disorder, but the facts are not relevant to these sort of rhetorical devices. While I have you, Lizzie Dearden, you'll be more aware than I am of the scheduled protests and or attacks on various locales this evening. What can you tell us about that? I mean, the predicted riot in Birmingham didn't happen, for example. So what can we say about the likelihood of there being more trouble tonight?
So in particular, the events of today have stemmed from a group that was set up on the encrypted Telegram communications app by neo-Nazis. And I'm not using that word lightly. They were posting pictures of Hitler and saying Heil Hitler. So, you know, definite neo-Nazis. And they drew up and circulated a list of immigration solicitors, firms and refugee charities across the UK that they called for people to, shall we say, attend with a lot of fire emoticons tonight. And what the police have been trying to do ever since then is work out how credible this is, because now the situation is very complex, because the group that initially posted this, thousands of people ended up in the chat, but the original people who set it up look like they're a very small number of people, and we don't know where they are. We don't even know if they're in the UK. But the problem is that now people will invariably turn up to these places anyway, because even if far-right protesters don't turn up, it seems like there's a large amount of counter-protests and kind of defence groups, if you can call them that, forming. So the police are very concerned, and they're preparing for significant disorder tonight, because the concern is that even if the original neo-Nazis who called this on never materialise, so many other things will be happening. Large groups of people will be attending anyway, and everything could still kick off.
I see. So it depends on who turns up, in a way.
Yeah.
If you've got a large number of people there to defend or to counter-protest, and hardly any far-right activists do turn up, then things will probably be okay.
Exactly, that's the hope. And they've got different arms of the police. They've got specialist regional organised crime units who have now been pulled into this. And a lot of their work is kind of online intelligence, working out what's credible. So I think the police strategy for tonight is to try and get police officers where they need to be and to focus on what they would call the kind of credible events. But it's very fast moving. It's very unpredictable. And one of the things we've seen over the last week is actually a lot of the online events where there was the most social media chatter drew the smallest amount of people. And some of the worst incidents, for instance, the attacks that we've seen on asylum seeker hotels, they weren't advertised on social media at all, and they happened kind of spontaneously. So it's a really difficult job for the police to kind of balance what's being said online and what could just happen.
Oh, yeah, of course, operational intelligence. Finally, Lizzie, do we have any insights into the likelihood of the speed and the severity of sentencing acting as a deterrent for people minded to join in subsequent events?
Yeah, we've got our first prison sentences being handed out yesterday and today, and people are being jailed. How far that deters people remains to be seen. In 2011, for example, 9 days into the riots that happened then, more than 1,000 people had been through the courts. We're over a week in here now, and I think the number of people that have been charged is around 120. So whether it's because literally fewer people have been rioting or whether it's for other reasons, far fewer people are actually being processed, and they're being processed more slowly. So we don't know what effect that's going to have and whether kind of news of these prison sentences is going to trickle down fast enough to make people question themselves tonight or tomorrow night.
Well, we will sadly soon find out. Lizzie Dearden, the Home Affairs and Security journalist and author of Plotters, the UK terrorists who failed. Many thanks indeed, as always, for your insights and your time. The time now is 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's amazing how many of these roads lead back to Farage, isn't it? I did get that correct when I was talking to Lizzie when Farage, I think last week, talked about how the soft policing at the Black Lives Matter protests was the beginning of these sort of problems. And I mean, you can say those things a bit like, I suppose, amplifying claims that you've got from the social media account of a man on trial for people trafficking and organised crime. You can say the soft policing of the Black Lives Matter protests. Ever since, this is what he said, ever since the soft policing of the Black Lives Matter protests, the impression of two-tier policing has become widespread. Typical Farage, using a word like impression, but also stating a fact that the policing of the Black Lives Matter protests was somehow soft, which of course it wasn't. Quite the opposite, in fact. The Network for Police Monitoring undertook a report, an inquiry into this. I'll read you a little bit of it. Informed by over 100 witness testimonies, the research found that police officers disproportionately used excessive force and kettling at BLM protests, mostly against black protesters, many of whom were under 18. And on some occasions, black independent legal observers were caught up in it. Excessive force, including horse charges, one of which rendered a woman unconscious, baton charges, pepper spray, and violent arrest was commonly reported and well evidenced. The report also concluded that police reneged on its duty of care to sick or injured BLM protesters, selectively enforced COVID-19 regulations, and failed to keep the public safe from far-right and racist harassment and violence. But put that through the mangle of Nigel Farage's twisted mind, and that becomes an event where the policing was soft, and therefore the perception of two-tier policing becomes acceptable. The facts are always there with Farage. The facts are always there to completely demolish his rhetoric, but if his bigotry appeals to you, you're not going to be interested in the facts. So what changes are you making to your life as a consequence of the current crisis? Ali's in Maidstone. Ali, what would you like to say?
Hi, good afternoon, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
So I'm really in this circle of fire where I'm an immigrant, I'm a Muslim, and I'm brown. I'm Pakistani. So I really, really worry for what's going to be happening over the next few days, weeks, and moving forward. I've got a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they're already asking me questions about why do these people hate us so much.
Oh, dear.
And the first thing that I need to say to them is, I just don't know. I'm lost for words at times.
Yeah.
I've always taught my children to be respectful for everyone's upbringing, background, and culture. And they still question me. And
you've not had to have these conversations before?
Not to this extent where it's coming up in the news where my wife is now worrying about my son going to school in September on a public bus and wondering, is he safe or should we be dropping him off to school ourselves?
Yeah.
I've got a friend who's just flown over and we're supposed to be meeting up in Canterbury, but we can't do that now because there are now protests scheduled to go on in Canterbury. So, it just worries me, James. And
of course it does.
And the thing that I'm genuinely, what I feel is actually positive is we've got Keir Starmer leading this country, and I shudder to think what would be happening if we still had the previous government in charge.
Because I mean, you think about Jenrick and Braverman or Patel, and I know the last two weren't in government. I don't think Jenrick was actually towards the end. But when you look at phrases like lefty lawyers or stop the boats or covering up murals in processing centres, the reason why they've either been silent or if they're running for leadership, they've made sort of condemnations with never referencing their own role in fomenting these kind of feelings is because they can't do what you've just alluded to. They can't say, perhaps calling the Palestinian marches hate marches.
Yeah.
What on earth? What words are left to describe what we've seen up and down the country in the last week? If that's a hate march, what the hell is this?
I do not know, but I mean, I just have a question for all those out there who are going on these marches.
Yeah.
To just think about the children, about the young ones, and what impression this is leaving on them. And, what sort of a country, what sort of a future do you want to leave for your own children and their children? I mean, there's so much love and there's so much beauty in this world. James, I've lived in 7 different countries. I've traveled around the world. There's so much beauty in this world, and there's so much love and respect for everyone out there. And I think if we just focus on that, that is so much more important, and we embrace the differences that we have rather than use them as something to hate. It's just wrong. And it really, really does worry me for my own children as well.
And again, I hate these conversations where I've got nothing to add at the end except gratitude for your optimism and your insights and sympathy for your situation, because I don't know what I'd say to my children if I was in your situation. My heart would break at the very question. Speaking of heartbreaking, this is from the Twitter account of a journalist who is based in London but is a reporter for an American broadcaster, NBC News, and this is something that has been sent. It was sent to him yesterday. Some of it gets you, some of it washes over you, doesn't it? And some of it gets you, and it's hard to predict, and you never know which bits are going to get you and which bits are going to wash over you. But this one got me. Alexander Smith tweeted, I just got this note from nursery, beyond grim. Dear parents and carers, tomorrow there are planned riots which are affecting Waltham Forest, mainly Walthamstow. Can I please ask you, if possible, to collect your children by 5 p.m. tomorrow to ensure children and staff get home safe and avoid potentially being caught up in this? If you would like to discuss this further, then please give me a call. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter. So, protests, which is what they were at the beginning, supposedly, protests ostensibly called to mourn the murder of 3 little girls attending a holiday club and to express disgust at the perpetrator, about whom people like Nigel Farage had spread lies, somehow morphs into a movement that is now terrorising nurseries to the point that they have to shut their doors early and send the children home. So the next time you hear somebody in my line of work, or you hear a politician or a commentator use the phrase legitimate concerns, just remember the nurseries that are bolting their doors hours earlier than they should be, because they are so terrorised by the people possessed of legitimate concerns. Sheesh. And I mention his job because, that's a journalist whose job is to report upon matters British for an American audience. I forget what the tally is now of countries that are offering cautions to their own citizens to think twice before even travelling to these shores. I think Nigeria was on the list, the United Arab Emirates was on the list, Australia was on the list, a couple of others, I think, maybe Indonesia, I think. Extraordinary. 12:56 is the time. Last word, I think, looking at the clock, we'll go to Halla in Shepherd's Bush. Halla, how are you?
Hi. Hi, James. Hi. I'm all right. Well, I'm home, actually. I had emergency surgery the last couple of days, but there's always one question that wheels me out.
Yes.
I get to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I hope your recovery is speedy.
Yeah. I'm all right. I mean, Today, I'm actually off today anyway because it's my daughter's birthday.
Okay.
The daughter that I speak of. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the dichotomy of what happened to me recently, because my daughter she does athletics, on a casual basis. I mean, she attends a club.
Yeah.
And the other night we were watching the Olympics, and she said to me, I would really, really love to, really excel at what I'm doing so that one day I could actually go to the Olympics and represent Team GB.
Gosh.
I mean, it's quite improbable.
Yes, I take your point.
She's still in her PJs on the sofa, so I'm not sure how.
Fair enough.
But the following morning, actually, James, I'm home. I've had my surgery, and I'm home. And the instinct that's kicked in now, after actually realising that there's 4 million people who live in this country and probably living amongst us who voted for reform.
Yes.
Things have changed for me. So I'm not actually as surprised or shocked or alarmed or anything. But the dichotomy of this is that the following morning, I'm on the phone speaking to my dad, making sure that, when he goes to the mosque, my dad already knew what I was going to say to him when I phoned.
Right.
But it was just the other things, speaking to my mum and saying, when you get on the bus, my mum's 74 and she still works. We're going to work. She runs her own business.
Right.
And me phoning her and saying, make sure you take your headscarf off. She does, she doesn't wear a hijab, but she puts her headscarf off for modesty. Take it off, put it on your shoulder, and then when you get there, you put it on. Speak to my nephews, when you go in your lunch break to do your, afternoon prayer in the mosque, make sure you do this. And then I'm casting it wide, further afield to all my friends all over the country, people I went to uni with, people I've worked with, my wider network, the people who live near North Finchley, because apparently there is something planned in North Finchley or Walthamstow. So something else has kicked in, because I no longer think that the general rhetoric now is transient.
As beautifully expressed.
I no longer think.
I understand. I'm out of time. You've taken me right up to the limit, and I hope the tide goes out as quickly as it came in, but I don't think any of us are very optimistic about that. And I wish you, on a much lighter note, did I see you the other day?
Yes.
Did you notice me cycling past on my line bike?
Yes.
At full speed? I don't think I'm going to be troubling the Olympics judges anytime soon either, am I, Helen?
You could come join her.
Well, there you go. And that's it from me for another day. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So do download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Vanessa Phil.
James O'Brien on LBC.